Hey, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to the summer series of the Pro Chess League. And I am International Master David Pruess. I am joined by Isaac Steincamp, Deputy Commissioner of the Pro Chess League, and by Artak Manoukian, Manager of the Eagles, 2018 Pro Chess League champions. Welcome, Artak.
Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for organizing a lot of fun for a chess community. And also, it's a bit strange format for us, but we will try to learn and try to compete, because some of the things will not rely on us, but also relies on fans. So
that's right.
Let fans to support us.
Yeah, about half of the points in this series comes from the fan clubs, and half of the points come from the knockout between top representatives of each team. Now, today Armenia is playing its first match of the summer series. Hard to know what your fan club's going to look like and all that, but you have already participated in two series of the summer series. How did you enjoy playing as like a fan instead of as a member of the team? You played for San Francisco and Pittsburgh, I think. What was it like to play for something that wasn't your team?
First, I like Penguins, so therefore whatever it's associated with. Also, it's a palm grabbers, but Pittsburgh associated with the Penguins, so I can't lose this opportunity. And I know that Isaac is also a profound manager, and I like to support, but unfortunately, I not played very well in all these two. Also, in the case of Pittsburgh, I had a bit, but in case of San Francisco Mechanics, I do not help. I think it's a completely new reality, because first of all, you always do have a fear that your elo can be jumped through 2,200 and you need to make something in order to play. This is a challenge. But in general, I will say that it's a very, very popular thing. But we might think about encouraging the afterward the fans to take much more fun, for example, to elimination stage and etc. But I think this is for a future for Isaac to think how it will make also more competition among the fan clubs, because after two games, basically you're getting out and just can fun for the higher boarded players and etc. But we need also to think in the future how we could make these guys also to enjoy.
Yeah, it's a good question, Isaac. I'm sure you've been thinking about like this massive problem of how can you have fans playing more competitions without running into headaches around ratings and
just a small suggestion. For example, we can use this that you are taking half of your time. For example, it's Blitz here course in a next web page. It's more common, when you are taking the risk and sacrificing some of your time, but your winning point is multiplying by 2 or something like that. So this kind of small things and etc. That you are confident that you will win, and sacrificing some time and getting some points if you will do it.
That's definitely an interesting idea, and we're really excited that the summer series is the first event where we really get to see what the fans think in the Pro Chess League. For those of you guys who are in the Pro Chess League Club on chess.com, we've also announced the Vote Chess Championships between different teams, and I believe Armenia just finished up their match with the Chengdu Pandas a little bit earlier this week, and I believe they're playing the San Diego Surfers now. But let's focus on this match for a second. So Artak, you're about to play for your third team this summer series, which means that you will now have you would be the second player ever in the Pro Chess League to have played for 3 different teams. Cameron Wheeler broke the record initially, so you'll be the third player. What are your thoughts in terms of your chances against this Mumbai Movers team, and what advice would you give to your fans who are playing for Armenia Eagles? How do you expect them to be able to beat the Mumbai Movers?
First of all, we might say that Indian chess players, due to their population, are much bigger in the numbers. But anyway, I really think that I need to increase my efficiency, because at the moment I'm looking also the number of registered fans in my team, and we are far behind of Indian teams. So first of all, I would appreciate my fans, whoever is fanning for Armenia, and especially Armenian Eagles, to take an initiative and join to the club and give us their support. Basically, as you exactly noted, about more than 50% relies on our top board. For example, if Zaven will do his best, which he should do because a lot of things put on his shoulders, so fans can also increase or give some meat to that. But let's see how it will go. I am not so optimistic in this case, in case of fan battle. Why? Because if you can, in a case of Pro Chess League, if you are relying only on 4 players, now you should rely on a bunch of players, and it's unpredictable, completely unpredictable.
Yeah,
for sure.
And as you mentioned, we at the beginning we do have a bad edge, and whatever we will do, it's not good for us. Why? Because fans do not interest extremely, well supported to us, and we have a low fan participation. So, and this will affect also somehow.
Let's talk for a second about Zaven.
Hang on, Isaac. I think Artak is needed to help track down Zaven before the match starts. So we'll have
Zaven
to.
Is not there?
Yeah, we'll have to wait for another chance to to ask more questions of Artak. Sorry.
Yeah, I am here, but let me to put match on its way. So Zaven says that he was thrown up from this.
Okay. Is he in the Armenia Eagles account or in his own account?
He's in his own account. He do not have Armenian Eagles account. Armenian Eagles only belong to me.
Okay, so you need to give him the info, I think, for the Eagles match.
Քեզի ասպես հանել են։ Հիմա դու խաղում ես։ What should do Zaven? Zaven is, I'm just on the phone with him. He's saying that what is needed. He's on a web on a chess.com, but can't play. Should he use Zaven Andresian? He is under the Zaven Andresian nickname.
All right. We're gonna leave the interview at this point. We'll let you go talk with Nick and figure out the login. Good luck, and
thanks.
We'll hope to talk to you again soon.
Okay, if we will win, I am ready.
Excellent. All right.
Shall I leave?
You can leave this room and go to the main room. All right. Awesome. Well, unfortunately, he has to go iron that out, get Zaven into the right official account, because I had a bunch of things I'd love to talk with Artak about. Super enthusiastic and energetic member of the Pro Chess League and just chess community. His Eagles have been to the Final Four twice in San Francisco, which is right by my hometown. So I've got to meet him a couple times, which was fun.
And I'm going to be really curious to see how they do today. We talked a little bit about their fan numbers, and Artak was, very open about the fact that his team has, a lot fewer fans. And so I'll be keeping my eyes on Zaven Andreassian. He has 114 career Pro Chess League games. So he does have a really big experience edge. So, not only is the live club match important, his knockout battle where he's going to play Alireza Firouzja, Boris Savchenko, Farukh Amanatov, those are going to be really important matches as well.
Yeah. Yeah, they will. I guess as Artak said, new format, hard to know what's going to happen. Let's see. We're starting off with this match between the Movers and Armenia. The Movers player is Amanatov, who only has 4 games of experience in the Pro Chess League. So I guess out of all these players, it's really only Zaven who has that much experience. That's sort of a big difference today.
Yeah, I think in terms of experience, Savchenko actually comes second, and then Amanatov and Firouzja both have 4 career games in the Pro Chess League. But that's not to say that these players aren't very strong players themselves. Savchenko is the 63rd best Blitz player in the world, which is higher rated in Blitz than all of the other players in today's field. And I believe Amanatov at one point was the Asian Blitz champion, and he's the only grandmaster from Tajikistan. So I'm looking for a stronger performance from him. We haven't really gotten to talk a lot about him because of, the number of starts that he's had in the Pro Chess League, but we're going to learn a lot about what he brings to this Mumbai Movers roster.
Yeah. So let's talk about something else, Isaac. Should we talk about the fans, the format? Where do you want to go to?
Well, let's take a quick look at the standings that, as we just wrapped up groups A and B, so we can kind of, get our bearings on who's playing today and, what teams are in this group for the next 3 weeks. So we've got Armenia, and they're going to play Mumbai, and that's the first match for today. But on the other side of this group, we have Moscow Wizards, who I'm sure everyone's familiar with, and a new team, the Sao Paulo Capybaras, which is kind of like our new invitational Pro Chess League expansion team for this event. And they'll be bringing Alireza Firouzja later on today. And I'm sure a lot of fans in the chat already are getting ready to play in that match, given the number of fans that they've brought in these past few weeks.
Yeah, I think I'm really excited to see the Capybaras. I mean, these other teams are successful Pro Chess League teams, so I expect them to have some fans, right? Armenia's been in the Final Four twice. The Movers and the Wizards are also playoff teams from the Pro Chess League. So the Capybaras, they had to build their entire fan base out of nothing to come compete here. And they have successfully so far. I mean, they've got this massive fan club, almost as big as the St. Louis fan club, just in their first week.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we were to talk about fan growth, let's say if Sao Paulo wins this group, they would be the #1 overall seed heading into the Pro Chess League Summer Series. But they've got a long road to go there. This is the only group that's played so far that has 3 teams that were in the 2019 Pro Chess League playoffs, in Armenia, Moscow, and Mumbai, all reaching the playoffs of the Eastern Division. So I expect that it's going to be a tough challenge for Sao Paulo. They're also going to have to do really well in the knockout battles in order to progress. We've seen teams have struggled in the live club matches, but still have won the group, like Baden-Baden did, just by really strong turnouts in the knockout battles. So a lot of different dynamics happening here. I don't think Sao Paulo is just a write-off win, but they're definitely a slight favorite, I think, compared to the other 3 teams.
Okay. And sorry, I always want to remind everybody that that they can join. So everybody watching, you can play if you want to. All you would have to do is join either the Mumbai fan club or the Armenia fan club, Armenia Eagles or Mumbai Movers. And then you go into live chess, tournaments, and click join. So
definitely
play if you've got an itchy mouse hand today. Get in there, play some games for your favorite team.
Yeah, and one thing that we should bring up is that with every group, there is a best fan prize, which means that today we start from a clean slate for the next 3 weeks. So if you've been missing out on groups A and B, you can still win that $250 best fan prize. Stream your matches, blog your matches on chess.com, tweet at us using #SummerSeries and tag the Pro Chess League. There's so many ways now on chess.com that you can be active in supporting your teams, and we really encourage that participation with this best fan prize. So make sure if you're not sure if you want to play between Mumbai and Armenia, definitely make sure to sign up and play for one of the teams, so in that way you have a chance to be considered for that end of group prize.
Yeah. So let's see. The fan prize is $250. So that's a good thing to shoot for. Other prizes, the 4 teams over these 3 weeks are going to be competing for $1,500 through $600 in prizes for the teams in just 3 weeks. That's really exciting for them too. And then, of course, a spot in the Summer Series Championships where there's more money to be won at the end of the season.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's really, I think this was the hardest group to kind of pick who might make it to the Summer Series Championship, right? Because we obviously love all 4 teams in this group, and we all think they have really good chances of progressing, but it's a really tight field. The top 2 are guaranteed spots in the Summer Series Championship. The 3rd place team has a chance through the Twitter vote. Who are your favorites right now in terms of, before we start, who do you see moving on to the next stage?
Yeah, I kind of heavily weighted the current size of the fan clubs. Although, I mean, once the division gets started, it's possible then the next couple of weeks that changes. We've seen some teams that went from number 4 in fan growth to number 1 from 1 week to another. But I went with the Capybaras and the Wizards, who have the 2 biggest fan clubs at the moment after 1 week, or going into the first week. as the most likely to advance.
Yeah, and I actually have the same picks, but what I will say today, what I'm going to be looking for personally, if Mumbai is able to beat Armenia pretty handily, and then Moscow really struggles against Sao Paulo, I might switch my picks, and I might put Mumbai in second, Moscow in third. I think there's a really tight race between those two teams, and that could ultimately shape who goes into the Summer Series Championship. So both matches are really important today in terms of setting impressions, and not to mention Armenia, the 2018 champions. I know that we're both projecting them to finish at the bottom of the group, but it just takes a really strong performance in the knockout battles. We've seen that through Georg Meyer and Dmitry Collars and the Baden-Baden Snowballs. So just because they're not favored in the live club matches doesn't mean they can't reach 10 points and make the make the next stage.
Right. Baden-Baden got 8 out of their 10 points that they needed to qualify just through the knockout. And that's the other thing that's really hard to predict is like all 4 teams have brought strong grandmasters. So we don't yet know if there's going to be somebody who's somehow going to dominate that format, or if it's going to go back and forth and each week a different team will win the knockout. Yeah,
absolutely. And it looks like our match has started. And as we saw earlier in the interview with Artak, there were some technical challenges in terms of being able to reach Zav and Andreasyan. So what that will mean is that there is actually a 2-point live club match penalty for Armenia. So even though the scoreline says 0-0, it's really 0 to -2 right now, since it will result in the pairing of Faruk Amanatov playing Armenia's best fan. On the other side, though, great experience for the Armenian top board. He's going to get to play a great GM in Faruk Amanatov. So I guess we'll start there. We'll probably figure out by the end of the day who his opponent is, but for him, it's a great opportunity to try to play one of these teams. I don't think this has ever happened in the Summer Series so far. So
I think we know who it is. It's Vahe Mendelian. That just sounds like his name.
There we go. And is he from the United States? Maybe he woke up really early this morning.
He's got a U.S. flag.
So that probably means he woke up really early this morning trying to, think like, oh, maybe I'll get a game against Mumbai's second board and I can drink a cup of coffee and, kind of go into the game, pretty simply. But now he's going to play, one of the best players in Asia and the only grandmaster from Tajikistan, a player he might not have ever played in his career otherwise.
And he's like, what? Wait, I'm playing a GM right now?
I mean, he looks pretty confident. I mean, this is a standard London system. And, I've taught a lot of my students how to play the London system. And this is the bread and butter, right? If you don't know how to play this exact setup with white, then you shouldn't be playing the London system. I'm thinking of classic games like Gatakovsky against Sam Shankland happened in this line, as well as a lot of other classic London system games where white should just be comfortable developing. So I'm a little bit surprised he's spending a little bit of time, but maybe he's adjusting and realizing now, like, oh, I'm playing the big guy. But I mean, okay, if you have to walk into preparation,
you may be in a little shock.
Yeah, absolutely. What are your thoughts on this move H3, by the way? I usually don't recommend this move order for, when my students play, because precisely this move Bishop D6.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering myself, like H3 or Bishop D3 because of Bishop D6. So after Bishop D6, the H3 move seems like a slightly wasted move. It looks like Black could even play E5 at will, and will. So I think Black's completely solved this opening this time. So yeah, maybe H3 is a bit of an inaccuracy.
Yeah, and I've lost a lot of blitz games myself, trying to time this H3 move at the right time and then just allowing this push E5. And usually what white tries to do is play for like a knight E5, try to stop that dark squared bishop trade, or maybe instead of taking on D6, playing the move bishop to G5 and putting the pressure on that F6 knight. When you play this move H3, bishop D6 basically forces you to trade. And I understand that you want to play H3 to stop knight to H5, but in that line, it's important to realize if you haven't castled yet, your rook is still on H1, which means that when you play this move knight D5 and he plays knight takes G3 and you play H takes G3, you can actually use this G pawn as a battering ram against that H7 pawn. So this actually is a line that I tell my students, like, look, you're giving up the bishop pair, and we've been taught that that's not a good thing, but you have a lot of counterplay here, and that should not be, dismissed at all by any means.
Yeah, I guess the bishop pair is like an easy thing to know about. It's a, 2-word phrase that makes sense, but there's like, 1,000 different kinds of advantages and disadvantages in chess. And if you're not willing to trade one for another, then you can't really play chess. So, bishop pair be what it may, you have to be willing to consider all kinds of different options. All right, so the game's progressed a little bit now, and it looks like Amanatov's going to develop his bishop from c8 to b7, even though it already had the open diagonal through e6 and h3.
Yeah, and I already like Amanatov's position. I mean, it's, I'm looking at being able to play bishop b7 and then like a move like knight e4, and then that knight becomes toxic. If you're white, you really don't want to take that knight unless like you can win material, because allowing black to play d takes e4 and then bring a rook over to e8 and control the e file, it's going to be really easy for black to play, especially in these 10+2 time controls. And so I'm a little bit concerned, and I want to see if white's going to try to break through e4, c4. Can you shatter that pawn structure and try to change the balance of the game?
Right. Well, e4 would be super hard for white to play since the knight's on it and black can play rook e8 and bishop b7 is going to control it. So I think if white wants to strike back in the center, c4 is the only real option.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think this move rook e1 is just a little bit too slow. And now, I mean, how are you going to, stop black from playing knight e4 and just using the space advantage, right? We've talked previously in past shows about statics versus dynamics. In this case, black is clearly statically better. So it's up to white in order to kind of make that balance to start playing dynamically, start trying to change the pawn structure. Maybe you have to change plans now, look for b4, look for c4. But, if white's not active in these next few moves, I mean, this could get really, really bad really quickly for white.
Yeah, and concretely, there's already a concern that if white plays c4 here and black can take, hitting the bishop, so white has to recapture with bishop or queen, and then black can play bishop takes f3, g takes f3, and sort of spoil the king side a bit. Now, this might still be palatable for white at the moment, because they've got the idea of posting the queen actively on f5 as a follow-up, and they're first with the rook on the d file. Maybe they would have enough activity to play this position with a messed up pawn structure, but it's risky, and the longer they wait, the worse it's going to be. So knight h4 played instead. I mean, all that to say that on move 17, I think was a really good opportunity to play c4 when there wasn't yet bishop takes f3. So knight h4 is played. At least that is a very smart idea in view of the h6 move by black, that a knight on f5 will be harder for black to challenge here.
Absolutely. Are you surprised by g6 and how quickly Amanatov played that? Because like if I'm looking at this position, right, I'm thinking g6, all right, puzzle rush time, bishop takes g6, knight takes g6. Is there a continuation? I think black is okay because the queen's on e7, but are you surprised at all by how quickly, black made that decision?
I think that the tactics here aren't super deep, right? There's not so much to calculate. And so it's basically just a matter of Amanatov's like instinct, whether bishop g6, f g6, knight g6, queen moves, knight f8, rook f8 is good or bad for him. And his instinct just said, that's fine, I'll do it.
Yeah, and now that we're actually getting this position on the board, I think what Amanatov has realized is that if
he also has queen h7, maybe he calculated that.
Yeah, I think, I wasn't expecting, knight g6 here because of queen h7. But in the case where queen takes g6 was possible, black does control the g file at the end of that line. And then black can play this move d4. And then everything just falls apart because you've got this central tension and the g2 pawn is weak. And I think, black is just completely better there. Also more material. That's also nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so now there's the danger of losing the knight to king g7. That's the threat. The king will get busy. So he could defend his queen with a move like rook d2.
Yeah, I mean, this is already kind of tough. I mean, the downside of the rook d2, right, is when you move the knight, now you have to play after queen takes c2, rook takes c2. Your rook is, it doesn't belong on c2, so you've just wasted 1, 2, and then 3 moves bringing it back to d2, so it can stop any sort of d4 push. And so, I think this is just a bad case of a sacrifice not working.
Yeah, I certainly don't see how this could work in any sort of traditional sense.
Yeah. So since it looks like Amanatov's in control here, we should probably take a look at the Armenian Eagle that is playing today, and that would be Artak Manukyan. He does have a rapid rating under 2200, so we should probably take a look to see how he's doing against DX Apollo. He mentioned during his interview he's played for the San Francisco Mechanics and the Pittsburgh Pawn Grabbers. So yeah, this will be his 3rd team of the summer series, and it looks like he's actually in a little bit of trouble here. Queen takes d4, bishop takes h7, instant puzzle rush tactic there. The Armenian Eagle could be going down here.
Yeah, and depending where he goes, queen g2 could be very strong next move. So,
I mean, I think what he's counting on here is queen g2, king f8, bishop takes f7, bishop takes h7, and then f3 is maybe what he was looking at. But then queen g3 is just in time to stop this sort of discovery idea. So I think Artak is just going down a piece.
Yeah, I think this situation with Zavin not getting logged on was stressful for him. I can only assume. Having been a manager, what would you say? Would this stress you out?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those moments, right? And like for all of the viewers out there, if you've got a team that's about to, that's trying to get into the Pro Chess League qualifiers, and you're trying to figure out how do I run this Pro Chess League thing, the best thing you can do: actively communicate, make sure you tell your players exactly what they need to do, remind them, give them timely reminders. This was just an unfortunate case for Artak, and I think he winds up losing this game. And I think it ultimately is because of that situation with his board one.
Yeah. The match score now 3-2 in favor of Armenia, despite Zavin not getting in.
Well, keep in mind that's actually 2-1 because of Zavin not being there, and the rules state that Zavin won't be able to get points, and so therefore he has to give 2 points to Mumbai in doing so. So, all right, well now it's 2-2, but it's still a tied match.
Really? I see 4 points for the Eagles myself. No.
Right. Well, the points are applied after the fact because Zavin didn't show up, so his points aren't calculated in the live club match.
Okay, so you're subtracting from the Eagles instead of adding to the Mumbai when you're counting it. Okay. Let's see their board 3. Kanya Mazikubo, who's won the queen early on in this first game and has the black king on the run. Well, that's about everything you can want in a chess game.
Yeah, let's take a look to see how we got here.
This is a complicated line, this line with bishop d7 and the Karakhan Panov. I haven't seen it ever played by someone other than me. All right, let's see. b4. Don't tell me he took. Don't tell me he took. Well, there went the queen. All right, so yeah, I mean, the big danger for black in this line, and maybe the reason that nobody ever plays this, is that the knight on a5 can get trapped. Excuse me. It's going here to defend the pawn on c4, but in response to the pawn on d5 kicking it, that means it's gone to a square with absolutely no retreats. And yeah, the main plan for white is to win it with b4, which Kanya did. And here's a nice little tactic, picking up material.
Oh, and that's a nice move, queen to c1, because you're threatening mate, and so black has to give up this knight on a5.
Which is still trapped, by the way. The queen covers c4, so the knight is still trapped.
Yeah.
She can't do anything there. And this should be, it's a rook against the knight. This should be another win for the Eagles there.
Yeah, and this is an important game now for the Eagles, as he's one of the 2 titled players representing Armenia here in this game. And it looks like the Eagles about to land here. I mean, you can, you have a lot of different options if you're Armenia. You can start to, trade the rooks on d5 as he just did, and all these dark squares is going to be impossible for the Mumbai player to defend.
Yeah. So let's go on to another game here. Sharpshooter and NK123. And this is our first sort of balanced looking position.
Yeah, for sure. And this is actually kind of complicated. I mean, you've got a big decision here if you're white. If you play this move e5, the f5 square opens up for this block knight, and that could be bad news for white. If white wants to think about, do I want to take on d5 and try to get a structural weakness for black? Well, then he's got the c pawn and the f pawn, which are both kind of visible targets. So even though he'll be creating a target on the black side of the board, he'll have 2 of his own as well in terms, once he fragments that structure.
Yeah, white's already got a bad pawn on c3. Got to wonder about the pawn on f4. May not have a lot of great options. Like e5 probably allows rook takes f4.
Yeah, that too. I mean, it's not the best position to be in for white, and I'm sure some of the viewers out there are looking at, well, I have this idea, knight d4, and I throw knight takes e6, and I get a tempo, and then maybe I can play a move like f5. But the problem with knight d4 there was after d takes e4, if you play knight takes e6, queen takes d1, and you're not actually forking the queen and rook anymore. You're just simplifying the position. So this would have been more than serviceable, I think, for black.
So basically, I think white's only option comes down to was to trade on d5, which they did. And then I'm a little surprised that black took back with the e-pawn. I thought, that they might want to trade off the bishop on c6. But as I think about it, I mean, knight d5 was interesting as well, attacking f4, c3, and threatening knight e3 in some cases. So actually, I mean, black probably had all three options. But here comes the knight to d4, and that should stabilize things. Each player has has 3 pawn islands, so things shouldn't be so bad for white.
Wait, rook takes f4. Does that actually work? Bishop takes.
He's got queen b6 check in response to knight e6.
Yeah, and then bishop d5 and knight d5.
Yes, knight d5. So white may have assumed that black couldn't take on f4, and black, despite having less time on the clock, decided to double check that before, just playing a simple move. And yeah, I mean, you will be rewarded if you now and then double check tactics, if you invest a little time on that.
Yeah, for sure. And, this month I actually got a chance to interview Chess.com's coach of the month, Matt Bobula, who's a streamer here on Twitch for Chess.com. And one of the things he tells all of his students is you need to get in the habit of not just looking for the forcing moves, but just double checking before you make your move. Is my opponent hanging any pieces? Am I hanging any pieces? Am I sure that the tactic works out? So I'm not actually, dropping any pieces in this particular position. And this is one of those cases where, the pawn on f4 looked hanging. Like, even I had to double check for a second to make sure bishop takes d5 and knight to e6 weren't working. But spending that extra 30 seconds could have made the difference. And now that time edge feels like not as big of an advantage for white.
No, I would think that at this point, an extra pawn is worth more than an extra minute on the clock. Although 2 minutes from now, I might not think that anymore. But
right.
Yeah, for the moment, that's a good start for black. He puts the rook on another square where you have to double check bishop d5 check. And again, black is accurate in his calculation. So white needs to whip something up. And I think queen g5 would be a good start, followed by h4, h5.
Yeah, I think white more or less needs to go for this option. And, I'm looking at this position, trying to figure out exactly what white wants to do. And white still has play. But the one thing I will say is that e takes d5, that might be the mistake that black looks back at this game and been like, man, I had this in the bag, but my bishop on c6 is terrible in this current position. If I had played bishop d5, just at least traded that bad bishop off of the board first, and then played ed5, it might have been a little bit more feasible to kind of make this position work.
All right, nice. He played this move, queen g5. One important thing about it was that black couldn't play knight f5. He was preventing it because knight takes f5, and the g-pawn can't take because of the king, and the rook can't take because of the queen. So queen g5, now queen d6. This may be trying to play knight to f5 again. So white will have to choose between bishop g4 or the h4, h5 idea. But the second game is going for Firouzja Amanatov. So let's quickly see what opening he's playing. Looks like 1 e4 from Amanatov.
Yeah, and unfortunately for black, he actually walked into something I've seen Amanatov play before. I believe he beat Andrakin in like a Perk modern kind of setup. And when you play 1g6 against a player who knows his theory relatively well here with white, I mean, it's going to be an uphill battle. Black already has a little bit of discomfort. This bishop on b7 is awkward. That pawn on c6 is just as awkward. But at least for now, black can say, I have this knight on d5. So there's some hope that, like, if I can make it on to the middle game, maybe I can trade off a few pieces and work towards a slightly, not as difficult position.
But this bishop a3 may be converting white's positional advantage into something really concrete already, because if the rook moves, there's queen f7, which ends things. I mean, wins the bishop on b7, for example. That basically leaves knight e7 as far as I can see, or bishop takes e5. Bishop takes e5, white might even be able to play bishop f8 and still come out ahead in exchange. Let's think a second. Bishop takes f8. Yeah, I would go bishop takes d4, cd4, queen f8. Seems like an exchange white could take.
Yeah, and this isn't a good exchange sacrifice for black at all. I mean, this pawn on c6 at the end of the day is still going to be, a big target, and that bishop on b7 is not giving black the kind of counterplay you would expect if you were to, sack an exchange normally. So I think, white is just clearly better here.
Yeah. So, so a comfortable position for Amonatov, not particularly challenged in this first round by Mr. Vahe Mendelian, forced to step up for the Eagles as a fan up on the top board here. And so far the match is basically a dead heat, Isaac. If I'm reading the score at 10.5, 8.5, that means it's exactly 10.5, 10.5, right? So
right.
We've got a close match on our hands. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll see which way this match tips. Welcome back, everybody. In the minute that we were gone, the Movers have started taking a small advantage in the match that was dead tied as we came here, as we went to our break. So a lot can happen in the blink of an eye in rapid chess.
Yeah, absolutely. And, not having Zavan Andreazian ready for this first match could ultimately make the difference. The score currently reads as 13-12, but because Zavan Andreazian did not show up in time, that is actually a penalty in the Pro Chess League Summer Series rules. The score is actually 15-12. So Armenia's got a little bit of ground to make up. There's 21 players on both sides. So Armenia's top boards are going to need to step up and try to be able to, overcome this deficit.
Yeah. Well, they've got Kanya making moves for them again. He's up a rook and seeming to be a pretty big asset for them here on board 3. But let's get back to how Amonatov is handling this extra exchange. He's brought his rook to one of the open files. Duh, or good job, or whatever, But if you're a 2,000 rated player, then you probably would have done this too. If you're a 1,000 rated player, then here's a good lesson in what to do with an extra exchange. The advantage of a rook is only felt really when it gets to an open file. That's why a lot of locked positions are good for exchange sacks, because the rook's impact won't be felt. Another nice thing he's doing is he's putting his queen on this diagonal, the diagonal of the Luft to his king. And the point of that is to be able to lift his rook to attack the black king at some point without getting his king sort of perpetual checked by queen c1, queen f4, queen c1, queen f4. It's a common way for a king to get perpetual checked with these 3 pawns covering him. So now that his king's out of the way, he wants to put his queen on either c7 or d6, as the case may be, bring the rook down to b6 or b8, and try to checkmate the black king. That's going to be how to make progress with this exchange.
Yeah, for sure. And, some players might be wondering, well, when you have like these material imbalances, right? Queen and rook versus queen and bishop, where maybe black has an extra pawn or so. The key here for white, as you're kind of pointing out here, is to play on the dark squares. And because this king is on g7 and this escape square is h6, it's a lot easier for white to kind of orchestrate an attack on this king, whereas black is going to constantly be struggling to try to find ways to generate counterplay against the king on h2.
Yeah, maybe he's going to look for like bishop f1 once the rook lifts to b6 or something here, and see if he can get a threat off there at the right moment.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm wondering here if with this move queen f5, if that gives white the time to play queen a7 after king h6 to play rook b3, because now you have a tempo on the a6 bishop and you can lift your rook over to like g3, for example, and then try to play for queen f8. At that point, black's king is having to come out to h5, h4, and it's just bad news for black.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe possible, but he chooses to just get the rook off of b1 just like this, leave that 7th rank check available. All right, and black goes for his decisive trick, but it's going to lose to queen c7, which covers the check on c1 on queen f4, king g1 later, right? So after the king moves, white's going to be able to capture this bishop, and then queen f4, king g1, black's going to run out of checks.
Yeah, and it looks like Amanatov just kind of rolled over a low-rated opponent here, but we can't give enough credit to his opponent, Vahi Mendelian, for at least giving a strong effort here against Firouzja Amanatov. I mean, this is not a strong placer by any means. He's gonna have a lot to learn from this game as well. Yep, queen c1, and then just rook takes a6, and I think it's time to resign here.
Yeah. Well, a little warm-up for Amanatov. The fan club back to even. The Eagles just scored a couple points. Oh, there's a point for Mumbai, obviously, that we're watching here. So a super, super close match. Now it's Mumbai by 1 point in this match. Kanya scored a second point. Let's see how Manukian is doing in his second game.
Yeah, and once again, it looks like he's actually in a lot of trouble here. If he's not able to make this f pawn, roll down the board. I'm looking at like these pawns on c2 and a4, and I'm screaming, those are weak pawns. Black is going to get a pass pawn, before white can really try to make headway with this pawn on f4. Notice that if bishop to h3 here, black can get away with rook takes h3, king takes f4, and then beat white to the c2 pawn, and then just win the game. So it's actually not that simple to push this pawn forward if you're white.
Good point. Very good point. No bishop h3. Limited resources for white in that case. Man, that's like crazy. I mean, I remember when I was managing San Francisco in Division A, I kept thinking like, if we could get 1 or 2 of our 4th boards to come in here, and play in the match on board 2 or 3, some like 2,000, 2,100 rated player who's, an up and coming junior, that would be like a massive advantage. And when it comes to board 4s, Manukian is one of the best board 4s in the league. I mean, he's performed 24-40 over the course of the Pro Chess League season. He's got experience in several seasons, bringing his Eagles to the Final Four. And he's been able to score against GMs. And now in these fan matches, he's actually not been the automatic point that I kind of thought, a Pro Chess League board 4 is like on another level compared to just a normal 2150 from the internet,
Right. Well, one thing I would point out here is like he has been a rock in a majority of the live club matches he played. I remembered he went 2-0 in the match against Baden-Baden for Pittsburgh, which was really important to secure that tie back in the second week of Group B, if you recall that really exciting live club match. But one thing I will say, having managed teams and having talked to board 4s and try to give them the pep talk before the game, once a trend sets in the game, it's very hard to get out of it. And so that was probably the plan for Armenia, right? To bring Zavin on board 1, have Artak on board 2 or 3, be able to dominate on top. So if the bottom boards suffer, Armenia can still win the match. But that all changed before the match even started when Zavin didn't even show up. And so Artak is probably panicking right now. He's like, my game is even more important. I have to put a lot more pressure on myself that wasn't otherwise there. And so, for players who aren't GMs, and even in cases where they are GMs, these trends and trying to break those trends psychologically, especially in these rapid time controls, are particularly difficult.
Yeah. And this looks like a super close match, 18-18 right now, the score. But I think that had Zavin played, it might not even be a close match. I mean, it might be a clear advantage for the Eagles because Vahe Mendelian, who we saw playing on board 1, I looked him up. He's 21.99 FIDE in his own right. So he's a CM, titled player, surely a national master as well. So really they would have had, 3 extra title players on boards 2 through 4. You push all these players down to an opponent just one step easier, and it might have been a clear match for the Eagles. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, now we've got a tied 16-16 match with only a handful of games left to go. But, if there's one plus side here for Armenia, like Artak is trying to get the positives from this match. There's still the knockout battles later. Zavin will play in that, so he is confirmed to be back. But I'm looking at Kanya and thinking like, man, I should find a phone and call him to be my 4th board or a substitute for the upcoming Pro Chess League season. Because, I mean, he played a lot better than what his 2144 rating suggests.
Yeah. So we're going to move down the tables just a little bit here. Check in on our buddy Art Vega, playing here with white for the Mumbai Movers. Pretty interesting position he's got here with the D4 pawn under fire, E6 pawn under fire. I wonder if it's deliberate that white hasn't castled, if it's some kind of idea that he wants to throw his G pawn or H pawn in some case, or if he just hasn't had time because there's so much fighting in the center.
Yeah, I'm not even sure which opening this would have come out of, actually, with the pawn on E6 being isolated like that. Usually you can get IQP positions from various different games, but I'm trying to recall like what kind of opening would allow some sort of captures on at E6 such that this pawn structure could occur.
Right, like if black's pawn were on F7, there would be a knight on E6 that white would have taken, and black would take back with the pawn instead of a piece. That never happens.
Right. I'm curious to see what the chat thinks what opening this was before we bust it. Grunfeld.
Yeah, sorry.
There we go.
I revealed it just as you were asking the question by clicking back here. So it's an F5 Grunfeld idea. Very interesting. So at this point where white plays A4, this is a position where white could play more simply with something like castles or whatever. But white starts to get worried that rook D8's coming quickly. There's going to be pressure on D4 and decides to complicate the game. So that's where this stuff starts to happen. And now the queen walks into knight G5 because she wants to come to G2. And this is intense. This is intense.
This is definitely sharp, but if the game doesn't end within like the next 10 to 15 moves, then white's going to be pretty clearly better. I mean, I like what white did in terms of getting this pawn to A5 from a positional standpoint, because it means that B7 becomes a lot weaker. If white can find a way to keep this king safe, then it's going to be really hard for black, I think, in the long run. But as you pointed out, if you play knight G5 here, then queen G2, and now where's your king going to go? If you go queen side, there's a C file. If you go king side, well, the queen's right there. You can't even go there legally, and that creates a huge problem for white. It's not a positional battle anymore. It's purely tactical. Everything you know about chess, throw it out the window. You got to look through every single candidate move to be able to win this kind of a position.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say for a second, maybe even castling queenside's not that crazy. I mean, E6 is falling, rook G1's coming, but black has the moves knight A5 and knight D4 in that position right after we castle queenside, and I think it's not quite going to hold together, actually.
Yeah.
So, I'm going to say no knight G5. That brings me to castling kingside. If black takes on D4, we'll win back the pawn on E6 in a variety of ways. For example, knight D4, bishop D4, bishop D4. We can go rook E1 or knight G5. Either one's going to win our pawn back. But on castles, I wonder about bishop takes H3.
Yeah, I was just looking at this myself, but knight G5 allows mate, so you can't even fork this stuff.
Exactly. The key point is to stop knight G5.
Yeah, actually, this could be really problematic for white, because now you've got a loose pawn on G2. If you don't take that bishop, which you probably shouldn't, he's going to play bishop takes G2 next, most likely, right? And so if you don't have a solution for this, you're actually in a lot of hot water. Keep in mind that rook on F8 as well is opened up. So like, let's say you just play some quiet move, right? Let's just say white gets greedy or something. Queen B7 already, like rook takes F3, bishop takes G2, queen G4. They're all possible, and I think you have to really like black here.
Yeah. So white played king F1, Isaac. Is this a real move or a mouse slip?
Well, I mean, it definitely solves the problem of bishop takes H3, right? Because now you have rook takes H3. The question, though, is, are you going to regret
on purpose then?
Right. Are you going to regret having that rook on F8? I mean, that's going to be the key question here.
I'm going to regret having a rook on h1 personally. Ugh. So now knight d4 happens. Bishop d4, and rook e1. So the same thing that I'd mentioned before, but without the king being castled. I do not like this rook on h1. I think that Art Vega is going to end up losing this game somehow. I know it's that's like an early prediction. It's not based on the evaluation just yet. It's not over, but very risky, this position with the rook on h1.
Yeah, and we have to give Black a lot of credit. He's very clearly a strong player. And Art Vega, I believe, has played in every single live club match so far this summer series, both in Group A, in Group B, and now in Group C.
I think I found what he should do is queen f4, because he'll keep the knight from ever trading for his bishop by the checkmate on f2 if he puts his queen on f4 here. Let's see. Oh, already some moves have been played. No. Let's see. Queen c2.
Interesting.
Trading off the bishop. Now, if the bishops trade off and the queens trade off, this may be salvageable for Art Vega.
Wait, wasn't there bishop d3 check there instead of rook takes d4? Bishop d3 with the idea of queen f2.
That's quite a there.
I was really surprised by how quickly, and then queen takes f2, right?
Here, I guess it doesn't mate, but it's quite good. Then
Black
queen
now
f4 again to mess up the coordination, send him back to g1, and then rook d4, and Black's winning.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised just by how quickly Black decided to play this move rook d4, because now White has options. Now you have to calculate queen takes c2. You have to make sure that there's no bishop takes f5 insertion later on in the later line. And sure, Black is slightly better here, but he still has to win this endgame. And we've seen time and time again in the summer series, poor endgame technique is not going to get you points in this format.
No. Or another way to put that is you've seen positions like this not get won many times, right?
Yeah.
So, he may regret his haste there, but I think that part of his strategy is playing on the clock, because Art Vega was down to like 30 seconds. He had 5 minutes. He just kept playing quickly. But I think the point of a time advantage is actually to eventually use that time. So when you get into a tactical situation, when knight takes d4 is played, when pieces are hanging, that's when you've got to say, okay, now I'm done with sort of the quick, obvious moves, and I'm going to take my time to make sure I put this one away.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Art Vega, he hangs the bishop there. I believe it was on d5, and this game's in the books. All
right, so I'm seeing the match is 1 point in Mumbai's favor at the moment. Let's check out Henricum and Anupam. Henricum has a queen against rook and bishop, which is a good start, and looks like Black might be decisively losing the knight to knight c6 check. Oh, I'm sorry I didn't get to this game sooner because I was interested in it. But now I think Henricum has kind of clarified things.
Yeah, and this is going to be a critical point now for the Armenia Eagles. Notice he also won the first game as well. So, very important clash here. And yeah, I mean, after queen takes f6, I just don't see how this rook on a8 is getting out in time. Not to mention you're just down like a lot of material. So this one should be just 1-0.
This was a nice little conversion tactic 2 moves ago. Rook e7 check, deflecting the king from those pieces that he was defending. It kind of breaks up the system of defending each other that the black pieces had. And then, now queen f7 is even more accurate than queen takes f6, but either is going to win without any trouble. Oh, look at that. Even more accurate than queen f7 is queen f5.
That's just brutal.
Tension. He's only got a minute on his clock, but super precise.
I guess it's easier to find best moves when your opponent's pieces are all in the back rank and don't really have any aggressive options. You don't have to really take into consideration their candidate moves at this point.
The thing is, when most people are winning, they stop being this accurate, right? Because they sort of like have this normal relaxation. Like, I'm cruising, I've got this, I can take the knight, I can do whatever. You find very few people who continue paying that close attention to their games when they're winning.
Yeah, for sure. But, definitely a lot of credit due there for Henricum. And that means that every single point is critical now. We've got a tied match here at 19.
19. We've got a game down here on the bottom between Tin Peasant and Bosa Sogata. And somebody's got an extra rook, but it's going to take me a second to figure out which way the board is.
So the white pawns are going up and the black pawns are going down.
So Bosa Sogata is white. He's got an Indian flag, so
Oh, but the key here is no, there's no
Blanking
key here
movers.
actually. For a second, I was trying to figure out if there was maybe a tactic, but there's really nothing that you can do here. Rook takes a3, and you can't get your pawns up.
No keys there. So let's see. Go Pikachu. This is a million extra pieces for ITP meet, which is for Mumbai. So it looks like Mumbai might have enough to win this match. I'm just going to go to the game that's actually interesting. Okay, I'm going to go to Sharpshooter against NK123 rather than spending hours watching people with 7 extra pieces play around with their food.
Absolutely. And
I've been known to do that long ago, but it's not fun to watch someone else do it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, NK123 was a regular for the Reykjavik Puffins back in Group B. And, we talked about, in Group B, how important fans were. Well, Reykjavik Puffins were arguably one of the best fan bases so far this summer series. So maybe this bodes well for Armenia in the future.
Yeah, I like Sharpshooter's position, what he's doing. I like his clock situation, although personally I'm more likely to find myself in NK's clock situation. NK123 did win the first game, so Sharpshooter's gunning for revenge here.
And I think the key is here, if you're black, like you are very clearly better in this position, and white doesn't actually have any active counterplay. Like there's no d5 or d takes e5 because your bishop is so strong on b6. So you can afford to take a little bit of time here, put your king, on h7 or h8, so it's not on the g file. Bring your rook over to g8 and try to find a way to make an f5 break work, or find a way to recoordinate your pieces so bishop takes h3 works. Use this time that white is struggling to figure out what he needs to do, and make that advantageous for you. And so in this case, I think this trade was good for black. You just opened up the a8 rook. That knight was arguably white's best piece. Now black can even consider a move like rook g8, queen h5, and then bishop h3.
Yeah, white wanted to clarify things a little bit because that bishop on b6 was sort of pinning the pawn on d4, creating pressure in the center. It was the bishop pair. So this way, he at least knows exactly what he wants to do, is get to the d file. But if there's no penetration point on the d file, then eventually black may be able to land one of these bishop takes h3 ideas that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm already trying to figure out how this might work out for black. So if you play bishop takes h3, g takes h3, already rook g3, and you have to play queen f1 at that point already to defend the h3 pawn. Well, that gives black time to play moves like rook g8. And so white, is in a lot of time trouble. He's going to have to calculate all these lines somehow, and that's not an easy task.
Hey, here's a nice chess pun. Make hell tall. One of the last players still playing has black in this equal material endgame here, which is also a very close one. I approve of that pun, and I'm not particularly a fan of puns, but make hell tall is a pretty good name.
Yeah, based on my previous opportunity I had to do commentary with you, I learned pretty quickly that you're not a big fan of puns.
So I would slightly favor the bishop over the knight here on this open board.
Yeah, and I was wondering,
double pawn as well, which makes it just a little bit harder to use his majority compared to white's majority on the other side. Knight e4.
Yeah.
Okay, white, you're the one with a minute on your clock. Don't hang an obvious knight fork. Do not do it.
Yeah, I mean,
do not have my permission.
You have no good options now at this point, and it's kind of unfortunate here for white. I mean, you're going to lose the a3 pawn now. I mean, this is game over.
Yeah. All right. So that'll make it a 1-point match, and back to NK123 against Sharpshooter. NK needs to pull out some kind of miracle defensive h3 here. 1.5 seconds left. How is that possible? How can you have less than 2 seconds after moving, Isaac?
I think he's got really bad connections, so some of that might just be because of lag. But I mean, 1.5 seconds or not, I mean, I'm just looking at this position and thinking like, wow, black is doing amazing. And, he might, like, if I'm playing with the black pieces, I'm playing this exact game. I'm playing so well that I don't want to win on time. I just want to win over the board because this is such a great game for me.
Please don't flag. don't destroy the beauty of what I've done.
Yeah, and now g takes h3, queen takes h3 is forced mate. If white plays king g1, then rook g2. It's just, completely game over here. So
yeah, loss
on time or not, congrats Sharpshooter 1 for an important win there. The score now is 23-20, and are there enough games at this point for
No, that's the last point. There was this game here where make hell tall has the extra queen. Wait, what happened to his extra queen?
Yeah, this just became a lot tougher of an end game to defend.
All right. I guess we'll follow what happens. I was going to say that this game would make the match finish 21-21, and it's only because of the missing player.
Yeah.
It would lose the match. But now I guess.
Oh, but queen g5 here.
Queen endgame, b5 or c5 should do it. So we still get our prediction, even though when we looked away, he stopped playing as well for a second.
Yeah. And so Mikhail Tal, he plays for Armenia, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So Armenia really has to be kicking themselves right here because this was free points on the table for them. If Zavod Adriassian shows up, let's just say he splits with Almanatov. Let's just pretend for a second that we're just going to assume that they go 1-1. Then Armenia wins this match hands down because it had better players at the top. So that's 3 points that they just gave to the Mumbai Movers. And, Artak was talking about fan participation and everything. The fans are going to play for you if you bring your best players. Unfortunately, they just fell short. And that's why Mumbai is going to be on top of the group.
And honestly, the fans came through. They had enough fans to win this match if only their PCL player had logged in. So you can't complain about the fans after a match like that. But I know that that Artak is not a complainer. I mean, he said, like, whatever happens, he was going to thank all the fans who did play. So I think having a great turnout, he's got ample reason to thank them and be amped for next week. That the Armenia Eagles fan club is big and strong enough to compete in this really tough Division C.
Mm-hmm.
You called last group the Division of Life. And when I was looking at the fan clubs going into this, I was thinking this is like the Division of Death because you've got such strong teams. Everyone bringing a strong GM to the knockout that we'll be seeing soon.
Yeah, for sure. And so this will be the first time the
Welcome back, everybody. And the summer series here, finishing up our first match and getting into our first knockout of Group C coming up soon. Isaac, how's it going?
Well, we talked a little bit while the stream was down for a second, and we'll get back to Armenia, as their match finished, right as the stream cut out there. But the video that you just saw, that's Krikor Sevag-Mkhitaryan. He's a grandmaster from Brazil. He is the general manager for the Sao Paulo Capybaras, as we mentioned at the top of the stream, the Pro Chess League's expansion team for the summer series. It's the first ever Pro Chess League team to ever represent Brazil. So we're really excited to have them. And if you haven't been reading the articles, if you haven't been keeping, in touch, that's fine. Alireza Firouzja is their team representative for today, which means that we've got a loaded knockout battle for today's 4 players.
Yeah. We've got a bunch of players who are not only good, but good at rapid and blitz specifically. Firouzja has that white and draw odds in bullet tiebreakers. And the highest FIDE rating at 2685 right now. But we've got Savchenko, Amonatov, and Andriazian, all rapid and blitz specialists. Several of them have been over 2,700 FIDE in either FIDE's rapid or FIDE's blitz. Andriazian as high as 2,766 in FIDE blitz.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a pretty crowded field, and we're going to learn a lot today about Alireza Firouzja in terms of what he brings to the table as a rapid player. We all know that he's an amazing bullet player, consistently number 1 or number 2 on that live ratings list here on chess.com. But, we talked about predictions earlier on, and I believe that you picked the Sao Paulo Capybaras to win today's knockout battles. I'm looking at like the path of resistance, right? I'm looking at that first match. He has white, sure, but he's playing Zavon Andriazian, a player who has 114 career games in the Pro Chess League.
A player who won a Pro Chess League title with black.
Yeah, absolutely. Tiebreaker. Not to mention that he scores better with black than he has with white, and that's for both seasons in the Pro Chess League. So that is not an easy game for Alireza Firouzja. Then he has to play the winner of Boris Savchenko and Firouzja Amonatov. Savchenko is higher rated than him in terms of blitz, and Firouzja Amonatov is, as we mentioned before, I believe he won the Eurasian Cup. I believe he was also the Asian blitz champion at one point. So either player could be a formidable opponent with black.
Yeah, and the big question really is who's going to show up, because all these amazing players, high ratings, great track records in their FIDE competitions in blitz and rapid, and even as you mentioned, Firouzja, I mean, he's played in the Speed Chess Championships. He logs tons of games online and is one of the highest rated players. But when he was called to play one match in the PCL for the Montclair Sopranos, he was ho-hum, 2 out of 4, right? Amanatov was absent when he was called to play his match. He scored 0 out of 4 somehow, which is inconceivable to me for like a 26 to 2700 level grandmaster on board 1.
Well, I'll solve that mystery for you right there, actually. So Amanatov had to play against the Tbilisi Gentlemen, and you can probably already see where this is going. That means
Tough team.
lost to Badurjava, Paichadze. I can't remember their third board, but then we all know that Niko Volkov is a very strong performer on board 4. So 0 to 4 definitely not what he wanted on that day. Yeah, I believe it was him. But if there's a team to go 0 out of 4 against, and you can say like, okay, that was just a bad day, it's definitely the Tbilisi Gentlemen.
Yeah, I suppose that allows me to imagine it. I would still think that's disappointing for him not to manage a single draw, a player of his caliber. I mean, that's not his best day for sure. So to me, the question is, these guys are so good, but Zavin struggled in 2019 season. In 2018 season, he was like, an MVP for the Eagles as they won the championship. He performed above his rating for the course of the whole season, logging over 50 games, like you said, and won the decisive tiebreaker. But in 2018, things dragged a little bit by his standards. He performed 50 points below his rating instead of like above, like we expect for this Blitz and Rapid specialist. So I think there's this like question of like, they're all supposed to be good at Blitz and Rapid, but who's going to really like show up today? What's been wrong in their Pro Chess League appearances in 2019?
Yeah, for sure. And, we've talked about how the knockout stages have affected the group standings of both Group A and Group B. This first match is really going to set the stage for us. We're going to know if Alireza Firouzja is just as good as Rapid as he is at Blitz. We're going to know if Savchenko can bring his playoff form. I believe he actually did relatively okay for the Moscow Wizards in that match with the Tbilisi Gentlemen. Firouzja Amanatov and Firouzja Amanatov and Zavin Andriazian, they're both unknowns to an extent, right? Zavin Andriazian, he has all his experience, but he did only win 2 games in the Pro Chess League finals in San Francisco. On the other side, Amanatov, from a Pro Chess League standpoint, we barely know anything about him. We just know that his personal career record is fairly impressive.
Yeah. And it seems like sometimes people perform differently in the Pro Chess League than other events. So it's sort of like this question of what's going to come. Even if they've played other Rapid events and other online events, somehow there can still be this difference. So I really don't know. I think if they bring these 4 players next week again, I would still be excited to see more out of them. But today will give us our first glimpse of which of them are going to stand up in this format.
Yeah, for sure. And, with the result of the Armenia Eagles Mumbai Movers match, I know that we've got the score there as 21-21, but the Mumbai Movers actually won as a result of Zavin Andriazian missing the live club match. And therefore, it's a 23-21 victory for the Armenia Eagles. Let's talk about what that means for the standings and specifically what that means for the Armenia Eagles moving forward. We knew that going into this group, it'd be a particularly challenging group for them because they have the lowest fan club numbers of every single team in the Pro Chess League Summer Series. That might not necessarily hold true by the time this group is over as Armenia continues to get more and more fans. But this was a game that we both predicted that Mumbai would win handily. And it's Armenia who actually probably winds up regretting, man, if like my player was just online in the match on time, this is 3 points for Armenia in a match that we had probably no business winning. Armenia's fans turned out, but you've got to keep the momentum going. And you've still got to play Sao Paulo, which is going to be, a really tough match.
Yeah. I mean, I found that the Summer Series has been able to surprise me many, many times. But my first prediction or view of how this group goes is, and this is largely guesswork, but I'm guessing the Capybaras score first place by a significant margin. They scored 12 to 15 points, let's say. And then the other 3 teams, I see them all having about 6, 7 points, all 3 almost tied for that second spot. So 3 points would be 100% decisive in that sort of situation in terms of which team between Mumbai and Armenia would go into the playoffs. In the scenario I envision, these 2 forfeit points could end up, which cost 3 points in the whole standings. They could end up deciding the entire group.
Yeah, and let's think about Baden-Baden's path to success, right? Because that's what Armenia is most likely trying to emulate: success in the knockouts and relatively poor performances in the live club match. Let's remember how Baden-Baden actually got those results in the knockout battles. It was Dimitri Collars beating Daniel Force and Esteban in a very complex game the first time that could have very easily gone either way. Then he had to beat Daniel Force and Esteban again in the following week. And then when Georg Meyer lost to Tuan Minh Lee last week from the Pittsburgh Pawn Grabbers, they then needed to count on Barcelona to lose to Pittsburgh, which was not a match that most people predicted, in order to guarantee that they had a playoff spot. So just, it's totally possible to qualify and you lose the majority of your live club matches, but the margin for error at that point for your top players is razor sharp. And so Zaban Andreazian needs to make up for lost ground here, needs to at least get 2 points on the board, I think, to have a reasonable showing for today. A 0-point showing is largely considered unforgivable in the Pro Chess League Summer Series.
Yeah, and in the KOs in Group B, there was an occasional IM showing up, which, made it a little bit easier for Kolars or Meyer to show their domination. Though, as I say that, I mean, it was an IM, Tuan Min Le, who kept them from winning all 3 knockouts. But I feel like the competition in the knockout here in the first week looks like one little step higher to me. I mean, if these people play like their rapid ratings, this could be incredibly fierce.
Yeah, and in the previous 2 groups, it was Firouzja Nakobian. He's the MVP of the Summer Series so far, 3 for 3. Only a loss to Sam Shankland and Zhang Di, I believe, but winning all the other games. And then in Group B, it was Dimitri Kollars going 2 for 2 in the knockout battles. I just don't see a case where a player is going to win more than 1 knockout battles over these next 3 weeks. I just don't think it's possible.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm realizing I got to follow everybody because these games are about to kick off.
So let's jump into predictions really quick as these matches are about to get started here. So I believe, as you mentioned earlier, you are picking the Sao Paulo Capybaras. Why are you putting your stock in Alireza Firouzja? Considering he hasn't actually played that many Pro Chess League matches yet.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I don't really know how the people are going to play. So in the end, Isaac, I just went with that advantage of playing white and having draw odds in these in this knockout bracket. There's a pretty significant advantage based on having the bigger fan club growth that week, and at this GM level, having white without the opponent getting a shot back at you with white in the 15-minute game, that's huge. Good chance to end things there. And then even if you don't, you go into this bullet game where you've got draw odds. You do have to play black then, but draw odds is pretty good. We've seen some players starting to use it pretty well, like Daniel Force and Esteban, just from a great position, just trades everything off into an opposite colored bishop position because it's basically checkmate at that level for opposite color, for draw odds. And Firouzja may be the best bullet player among these 4. I don't know.
Oh, hands down. He's by far.
So that's a reasonable thought. That means that if he gets into those bullet games, right, he's got the draw odds and his bullet mastery, right? So one strategy he could employ would be to just try and draw games with white, which is a professional skill.
Yeah.
Long ago, John Fedorowicz told me the hallmark of a professional player is being able to draw at will with white. Then he lost with white. No, I'm kidding. But but I mean, that is a thing that a lot of professional players have told me. They're like, look, if the player playing white wants to draw, I can't do anything. Really strong GMs have told me when they're playing black. Or they'll say, if I want a draw, I can get a draw when I'm white. I've heard that a whole bunch. So that could be a strategy for Alireza today. It might be a little bit boring for some of us if he goes for it. And he's an ambitious guy. I don't expect him to go for it. But if you think about it, that could be a strategy for him.
Yeah, and I had a really tough time picking a winner in this field, but I actually went with the Moscow Wizards for exactly the reason that you just mentioned. I know that Alireza is ambitious. I know that he's going to want to beat these guys in the opening and just be able to outplay these guys from move 1. And both Andreazian and I'm guessing Savchenko is going to beat Amanatov here. Really strong opening repertoires with black, and that means that if you play too aggressively, if you hyperextend, there's so many pitfalls there. I just think there's too many opportunities there for black to be able to get that edge. So I have Moscow beating Sao Paulo in the knockout battle final, but I would not be surprised to see it go the other way around.
Yeah. I mean, I think we would have to agree they could all go either way, but in the end, you sort of make a prediction based on either stats or your guts, and try to be right every time, right?
Absolutely. So,
and then who would you pick in the 3rd, 4th place match then between Amanatov and Zavin?
So we would have Amanatov and Zavin. And I think the key thing that we're going to both look out for in this game between Zavin and Alireza, which is about to start, is how is Zavin going to adapt to all of the things that have happened in the last hour, right? Not being able to, get onto his account, not being able, basically costing his team the match, right? Like that is a huge thing. And now he's got to beat Alireza Firouzja. And like we talked about Alireza, we know how well he's doing in the JSCC right now. So if he comes out of the gate and he just struggles and like he just gets completely demolished by Alireza, it's advantage Amanatov, because Amanatov actually had a really nice opportunity to warm up. He's like, all right, well, we got the 2 points. We're going to win the live club match. I get to play a low-rated player. Just make sure like I'm not hanging anything. Get used to playing in this time control. So even though he has far less experience, if Amanatov goes into that game more composed, I think Amanatov gets the point there, and Armenia leaves with a 0-point debt. On the flip side, if Andreazian gets a fighting game, even if he loses to Alireza, then at that point, I could be persuaded Zavin Andreazian gets the point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm finding it painful just imagining how Zavin is feeling right now. That like when you said, like, imagine that situation, everything he's gone through in the last hour, and I started imagining it, and it's like I'm sick to my stomach. Like that's my, chess player, chess manager, competitor sort of feeling. It's like it just kills me. I personally wouldn't be able to turn around. Obviously, he's a much more seasoned veteran, so there's a good chance he can. But that's a horrible feeling that he's got to fight against.
Yeah, and this is one thing that, like, as a former Pro Chess League manager, I've never had to worry about with my team in particular. But in watching other teams and how they adapt, right? Like, there have been cases in the Pro Chess League qualifiers and like various battle royales and the Pro Chess League regular season where a player is just late or has technical issues or isn't able to connect to the internet for some reason. Unfortunately, that lies on the team. And so what you usually see is the effect of that one individual bleeding to the other members of the team, and they feel pressure and they have poor results. We've never really seen a case in the Pro Chess League where that player gets a second chance and has an opportunity to score points that helps the team in the standings, right? So this is going to be really tough, I think, for Zavin. Like, if he beats Alireza today, like, that is a huge accomplishment, just given everything that the Armenia Eagles have had to go through.
Yeah, that is a good point you make, that there is this chance for instant redemption here, which might be different. So, like, he could be shook, or he could be like, I'm going to, make up for this immediately. I'm going to take care of this. So, yeah, we'll see what the story is.
That's for sure. And one thing to keep in mind here, if Zavin Andreazian somehow does beat Alireza Firouzja, regardless of if he's in the final or in the third place match or whoever he's playing, he's going to have black in both games too. So, that's going to be an interesting thing. Is he going to go for a more double-edged approach, or is he going to count on his bullet skills? I personally haven't watched a lot of Zavin, playing bullet, but I know he's probably in form. He just did really well at the World Open. I know he didn't win, but he was up there. And then he also did really well in the World Open side events as well. Blitz, rapid, all of those time controls I know he did really well in. So if he's in form, he's got a good shot, but he's going to have to do that with black.
Yeah. Yeah. He's going to have to do it with black.
So we should be starting any second now between these four players. If you guys are in the chat and you guys are watching either on chess.com through the Chess TV embed or on the Twitch front page, make sure to click that little Twitch icon and come follow our chess channel so you can get all of the updates for the Pro Chess League Summer Series, as well as all of the other events that we run here on Chess TV. And, we're talking about Pro Chess League Summer Series and all of the great players that we have here. But, one of the players who's here, Alireza Firouzja, he's also confirmed in the JSCC semifinal. I know that you just did commentary on the Parham Maksudoglu match the other day with Alexei Sarana. Now that you've kind of got an idea of all of the four players, do you think Alireza Firouzja has what it takes to win the JSCC?
Yeah, I think he's got what it takes. I saw his match against Sevian, who was a really tough opponent. So certainly he has what it takes. Here he is under the Sao Paulo Capybaras account playing white, and we've got a symmetrical English. Right away, he's playing not the most aggressive choice here against Zavin, not playing d5, keeping it a little bit more calm, more sort of positional waters by playing 3 knight f3 there. So that's a sign that he may be taking this at a sort of like more professional, right, calm approach.
Well, if I recall correctly here, studying these openings with white and ultimately deciding to just not play this line altogether, there is a lot of theory here still, right? And these positions could still get very complicated. I think all Firouzja wanted to do was establish, no, I'm not going to play the Benko. I'm not going to play into the Benoni. I'm not going to give you any of your weird hijinks or anything. We're just going to play chess, right? And that's what Alireza wanted to establish. And because he's in a rapid time control, he doesn't have to worry about like all this crazy tactical stuff in the opening if he doesn't want to. And so I actually think this was a really smart decision from Firouzja, just avoiding all of those really sharp openings. And now Zaven has to go outside of his comfort zone, play positional opening.
Yeah. That said, we talked about the idea of maybe going for draws with white. If he wanted to, here on move 8, knight takes c6. That would be the way to sort of like try and say like, hey, I am just the bullet god here. I'm just going to trade off the queens, make the pawn structure 100% symmetrical. All my pieces can develop. How am I going to lose this game, right? That would be sort of the like professional player just wants to draw moment. He didn't do that, so it looks like he's playing normal chess, right? Not insanely over aggressive, a little bit careful in his choice, maybe based on his own sense or assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of his opponent. Maybe he did some prep for today, but fully normal chess here. No drawing strategy.
Yeah, and I mean, this is, you know, I like that he went for a Morozzi bind kind of setup, because this knight is on c6, right? So if black wants to go for a hedgehog and play a6 and d6, that knight on c6 is usually misplaced and it wants to be on d7. So Zaven will have to figure out exactly what kind of structure he wants to go for, whether he ultimately decides to go for this hedgehog setup altogether, which it looks like he will. But he's going to have this extra thing to deal with, that his knight is on c6 and not on d7. He's going to have to play rook e8, bishop f8, g6, bishop g7 at some point. So there's some workarounds for that. You mentioned the professional thing to try to get the draw. Well, he was watching last week's show. He might have tried to offer a draw on move 3, right? Exactly what Tuan Min Lee did against Georg Meyer. And then Georg tries to play for the win and ultimately winds up losing the rapid match. So that might have been a strategy that Firouzja, might have gone for. But instead we see g4. As we know, ambitious player, right? Ambitious player plays ambitious things.
Aggressive. Yeah, I don't know which way this one's going to go. I feel like there is a little bit of weakness at c4 and b3 because of that early a3 that might be a possible source of counterplay for black in this structure if he can find the way to do it. But it looks like right now with rook d8, he was more focused on trying to play d5 somehow instead of go for the c file. And the threat of g5, is that a threat yet from Alireza? Could the black knight go to h5? Perhaps.
I mean, I think Alireza is just trying to get space, right? Maybe an idea like knight g3 followed by bishop e3 and then f4, and then have this option between e5 and g5 to try to break through on the king side. And he's going to be able to think on Zaven's time here, because this is going to take some time for black to figure out. And it's not clear yet, like what you want to do. And now we see b5.
Nice.
Very sharp move.
Yeah, so he's getting to play kind of like a Benko anyway, right?
Yeah.
Stack the pawn on b5, open the 2 files for his pieces, and probably get the pawn break d5. Unless black has some tactic here, which I don't think they have because the bishop can't like take anything just yet. A likely follow-up is d5 after the knight takes on b5. And then he's opening the rook. He's getting a strong position in the center, and he's got sort of some Benko play on these files against those pawns. So seeming like a nice idea from Zaven. See how Alireza responds to it. Should we check out the other games, see what their opening is too?
Yeah, for sure. So with the white pieces, that's Boris Savchenko. He's playing for the Moscow Wizards, and he's playing against Firouzja Manatov in a very popular variation of the Sicilian. Yeah,
white side of a Najdorf. Early on, knight d2, bishop c4 gave white some decent control over the d5 square. And then we had the same b5 pawn sack.
It seems to be the theme of the day, right? We have to get an L4 knockout games now.
All right. So takes. Queen a1. Yeah. And this b2 pawn is hanging. And if you drop that, then the c file falls apart as well. Right? When rook c8 comes, he won't be able to defend the knight on c3 and pawn on c2. So he plays knight d1 to defend his b pawn, but gives up the e4 pawn. And it looks like Amanatov has like a very, very comfortable opening for black out of the Sicilian. Trading that b5 pawn for the e4 pawn, basically by, fairly forcing b5. More of a tactic than a pawn sack, I guess.
Yeah, and I kind of have to say, like, I'm starting to look at that current position. I'm trying to figure out what Savchenko's plans are here, and it's actually not that easy to figure out. I mean, Black's bishop on e4 is just so much better than White's on b5, and Black's got these two central pawns, and so as long as he can prevent White from just moving his queenside pawns up the board, I mean, that in and of itself suggests, you know, a potential endgame advantage for Black. So I'm just looking at this position, thinking, how is Savchenko trying to get to the bullet tiebreak at this point, right? Like, I'm not even thinking about how does White play for a win.
That's true. He's got the draw odds in that bullet tiebreak. His position's not good, so definitely time to think about just defending. And in particular, I think he's poorly placed in the middle game because his pawn on g3, weakening that long diagonal, and now the black bishop like takes on e4. That's kind of scary. It's kind of scary, and I don't see how to ever trade off this bishop, because if you attack it, it can hide on b7 or a8. And if you want to oppose it, the knight is controlling both d5 and e4, so it's hard to do that. You could do some super long plan of bringing your own bishop to f1 and g2, maybe, if black doesn't stop you with queen a8. But even then, once you do, you trade light squared bishops, and your light squares are weak around your king.
Right.
So even that doesn't end the suffering, right? I mean, it might be a good defensive thing to try, although very laborious, but even that you'd still be suffering.
Yeah, one of the things I'm starting to realize is I'm kind of trying to calculate different lines for White here. A lot of players who I think are like under 2000 would be very quick to bring like queen away from e1, saying it's not doing anything, it's very passive. But that queen on a1 is actually serving a very important function, and that is it's keeping this knight on d1. As you mentioned, if White loses this b2 pawn, you can forget about staying in this game. Black is going to win pretty handily because the c-file just falls apart. So if this knight stays on d1, how do you plan on getting your rook active? How do you plan on getting your queen active? How are you coordinating your pieces in a way where you can play for an advantage? I'm just not seeing it.
No, you're right. The knight on d1 is a strong discoordinating force in White's position. So I'm not surprised to see Savchenko investing a ton of time here trying to figure out what the heck to do with any of his position, because none of it is very good, and it's the knight on d1 that's a big part of that problem. Let's pop over to the other game, which has had crazy action as well since b5 pawn sack.
Wow, it's unrecognizable.
Alireza just doesn't take it. Instead, he leaves his own pawn hanging on c4, right? He says, I prefer to give the pawn sack. His bishop f4 move seems to have prevented d5 for the moment from black by getting black to play e5. But he is down a pawn now, his b2 pawn backward and weak. So he feels like he's got to do something. Hits him with g5, knight d5.
Bishop d6, okay.
Knight into b6 with the idea of knight c4, and White could sort of start taking over positionally on the d file after recovering their pawn. So of course, more sacks, right, Isaac?
Absolutely.
Yeah, if there's ever a choice between having a bad position or having a good position, down material. In Blitz and Rapid, you see people very, very frequently choosing to go down material.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, I think Zavin made the right choice, just allowing knight takes a8 and saying, okay, my queen is active. Like, okay, this bishop on a8 is not a bad piece. Like, it's a long range piece. It's going to be able to attack e4 all day long. Bishop c7 here with the idea of playing d5. And I'm not surprised to see Alireza Firouzja thinking, which kind of feels contradictory to like when I usually watch him, right? Usually it's instantaneous moves. But no, this is a position where I think you have to really, think through what you want to do with the white pieces. You can't even really engineer an h4, h5. Your bishop on g2 is bad, as you're pointing out here.
Yeah. Like in the other game, White's got some really awkward minor pieces here. G2 is like killed by the pawns on e4 and h3. Knight on g3 is killed by the pawns on e4 and g6. So actually, I mean, in a certain sense, his position looks miserable. So when your position is miserable, then you need something like tactical and concrete.
Yeah.
Need to just be able to shake things up somehow. And I guess now the big question is if the black queen can get into b2 and try and perform a similar effect as the queen on a1. These games are kind of like twins.
Yeah, I mean, b5, now queen b2, like a lot of similar ideas here.
Yeah, see if we can sort of keep white discoordinated using this queen's power. Oh, and the dark square bishop's power. I'd be happy to be down this exchange. I'd be having fun here if I were Zavin.
Yeah, I mean, this seems like the kind of position that Zavin is used to having. I believe he did the same kind of thing against Zhang Di in the Pro Chess League final. He was worse in that game before he wound up sacking an exchange, confusing the position, and ultimately tricking White and mating him on the board, if I recall correctly. Yeah, I mean, Black is. I mean, this C pawn is not a pawn. It's a future queen.
Yeah. Just last weekend, I got destroyed in a position like this by, I was up in exchange, but couldn't fight like a passed pawn because of the opponent's sort of control of squares in the center. So I see that C pawn and I have sort of like flashback pain.
I think we've all lost painful games like this before, right?
I guess that's chess. It just means like losing nonstop painfully to all kinds of different things. Like, well, I've lost having my king attacked. I've lost to, passed pawn. I've lost to drifting in the end game.
So do you think that this means that Firouzja's knight takes a8 was a mistake? Because I mean, that knight on b6 was still pretty strong.
Well, I wonder if that wasn't like a position where he could have actually just brought the knight back to c4 and kept playing normally, instead of going to that messy position. Like if he played knight c4 and move 19, was there any like major problem with doing that? It threatens the bishop on d6. I don't think Black had any particular tactic planned.
Yeah, and if you're worried about like bishop c7 followed by d5, you can just play knight to c3 here, and d5 is covered. I mean, that bishop on g2 is actually serving a purpose. And I don't think he was that worried about knight takes g2 here. I mean, that's a bad bishop. So
it was probably an option not to take that. Yeah. All right. So Zavin drops the knight back to c6 for a moment. It was threatened, and I guess the alternative was knight b3, rook b1. I'll just show you guys what I was calculating in my head before, and Zavin probably calculated the same thing. You trade the queen here because the knight's hanging on b3. This is sort of like the line that I sort of laughed about because the pawn can't be stopped from queening, but queen takes b3, and then White's just winning at the end. So he drops the knight back. And now this pawn is under control for a moment, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm playing with Black, okay, the queen trade is kind of interesting here, but I was trying to figure out if there's a way that I can move my knight away from c6 and trade my bishop on a8 for this knight, so in that way, like I can, stabilize this c3 pawn and then try to play for like b4 and put my rook on a8 and try to get a lot of counterplay. But I'm curious to see like what the thought process is here, because you can't really play a move like knight d4. You've got to keep an eye out on the c3 pawn.
Well, you can play knight d4 because if rook c3, you have knight e2 check. So,
okay.
I mean, if it were Black's move, they could try for knight d4 here for sure. The big question is what happens on knight c3, knight d4? That's the really big question here. Black's probably going to throw an f3, bishop h1, and then, keep looking for tactics. Like if I go rook c1, for example, f3, bishop h1, rook to c8. So if I move the knight on c3, or if Black takes it, then knight e2 is not just going to be a fork, it's going to be checkmate.
Yeah, that is not a way that you want to go. I mean, it just looks like this keeps on just getting worse for White in this position. I'm not really seeing a way out.
Awkward situation. So let's see what Alireza did here. Instead of taking on c3, he played bishop f3. So he's starting to cover that e2. He's got the g2 square for his king now. So he's avoiding that like horrible boxed in scenario. What happens on knight d4 though? I mean, the calculation must be made. Rook takes c3, bishop takes d5.
Yep.
E takes d5, knight e2, bishop e2, bishop c3.
Maybe he's counting on the opposite colored bishops here, and then just saying, "I'm gonna win in bullet, guys."
Yeah, comes out fine for White. So I don't think that Zavin can just directly win the game with knight d4 here. I'm sure he'd like to directly win the game, but if he plays rook to c8, that probably doesn't help him set up any of that stuff because there's always knight e7 check for White if he plays knight d4, as well as possibly just rook f to c1. So, all right, first gets his king off of that. Maybe thinking about rook c8.
Maybe rook fb1 here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'd be nice to make progress. But look at Alireza, same idea, just gets his king out of the way of those knight forks. Knight
Super
checks,
prophylaxis
on E2. Yeah. A little king repositioning can sometimes change the whole balance of what's tactically possible on the other side of the board, huh? I mean, this is all a fight over C3 pawn between the two players and the different tactics around that.
Yeah, and Firouzja is putting a lot of pressure on C3. If Black's not able to continue generating like active play, like it's going to be very easy to see a way where Firouzja just wins the C3 pawn and says, "I'm up in exchange. What do you have?" And Black actually doesn't have that much left.
That's true.
So that would be one thing that like I'm a little bit worried about for Black. So like I'm already looking at a move like B4 with the idea that if A B4, knight B4, and you can't play rook takes C3 there because you give up the exchange.
Right, but the problem is that the white knight is on B4.
Oh yeah, there's that too.
So that's out too at the moment. There's not tons of great options for Black, frankly. If Black resorts to some situation like rook C8, knight A5, just trying to defend the pawn, White always has a second rook that can come to C1 to attack that, or the move knight B6 at some point to disrupt things tactically. Or White just says, sure, it's blockaded, plays rook B1, rook takes B5, and takes over on that file. Okay, so Zavin goes for the B file. Maybe he wants to play B4, A B4, knight B4, and trade knights, which would make it harder for White to ever win the C3 pawn, right?
Yeah.
That'd be sort of like a drawing scenario. Plus, if he thinks he's struggling to draw, then just trading pawns would be good. But rook B1 was pretty obvious for Firouzja. He plays it immediately. I think H4 might be similarly plausible here, but he's also got to keep checking if it's time to play knight C3. If it's time to play knight C3, he could play GH6, King H6, knight C3.
Yeah, I mean that's the big question here, and White's like 2 moves away, I think, from like completing, his development and everything, right? Like if there's a way he can engineer some sort of bishop E2 at some point, then or rook B3 even. Like he's only a couple moves away now from just being able to establish a clear advantage, I think.
Yeah, so finally, I mean, he thought a little bit. He could have thought more if he wanted to, but finally he plays H4 and just says, okay, HG, HG, what else can you do, Zavin? What other piece can you improve at all, or are you just stuck here now? Somebody in chat is saying that they get confused about the player names because it's like the team names. We use the player names so that you can know who they are instead of just saying Capybaras and Eagles. Then you don't know who we're talking about either. But the Capybaras is Firouzja Alireza this week, and Zavin is playing for the Armenia Eagles. And Zavin Andreasyan is like a fully Armenian-sounding name, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely up there. Yeah, for sure. Do we want to take a look at the other game, by the way?
Yeah,
it looks like things are heating up there.
Bounce back. We've been here for a while. Sorry.
Whoa.
Tigra versus the Movers. Amanatov for the Movers here. Free agent, not an Indian player. And this one has gone very, very badly for White. As we were kind of thinking back when we were last here, there was a long think. 6 minutes just about to play F4. Just felt like he had to do something. So EF4, rook F4, D5. So he didn't even feel like he needed B7 and A8 for this bishop. He just locked it in, feeling like it was not going to be challenged. Rook F1. And look, even with discoveries from the knight, right? He just keeps that queen on A1, like Isaac was saying, with this look at B2. Anytime White tries to do anything, it's going to cost them the queen side.
Yeah.
All right, queen A5, hitting that bishop. Decisive action begins.
Rook takes F6.
Else he was just going to lose this pawn on C4 for nothing, right?
Yeah, I guess since it's same colored bishops, it's actually a lot harder to defend than if it were opposite colored bishops.
I mean, was rook F4 at all another defensive option? If knight H5 or something, the rook still has the D4 square to go to. And if black takes, he can hide in the 3-on-2, which has fair drawing chances. So is rook f6 desperation, or do you think this position might actually be good for him finally? Savchenko, rook f6, gf6, knight d5. He's got 2 connected pass pawns this way, avoids the cheeky little rook takes d5 threat. And do you think Savchenko maybe like got in the game with this exchange stack?
Yeah, I mean, that was my first impression when we flipped over to this game, not knowing that, all of this has actually happened. And so, yeah, I mean, I actually really like the fact that white has these queenside pawns, and it's very difficult to see how black is going to accurately defend this, even with the time advantage. Very creative play by Boris, but we knew that Boris would be, really creative in this kind of regard going into today. He's known for playing these kind of, rapid and blitz games with creative sacrifices and everything. And I think he's just proving his name here at this point.
Yeah, it's very hard for Amanatov to chip away at these 2 connected pass pawns at the moment. This knight, bishop, and 2 pawns together, pretty strong fighting unit. Might need to get his king in order to do something, and maybe that's the meaning behind f5. Now, Isaac, who's the team manager of Savchenko and the Moscow Wizards?
Yeah, so the Moscow Wizards team manager could have also probably done really well in this format, and that's Vlad Dobrov. I see him playing Guess the Move here for this game. He is currently streaming, I believe, in Russian over on Tortuga Chess on his own personal Twitch channel, where he'll be covering the entire, duration of Moscow's performance today. So that will include the knockout battles as well as the match with Sao Paulo later on today.
All right. So Vlad Dobrov, in addition to having an outstanding Pro Chess League season himself, is actually the manager of the Wizards and is streaming their matches in Russian right now. So that's big for them. If we've got any Russian fans who don't understand what I'm saying, they can go check out. Well, they can't understand what I'm saying, but they can go check it out in Russian.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this is almost just as complicated as the Firouzja game, I think, just because it's so difficult to be able to actually defend this, right? It's not like you have a clear pawn break on the king side that's going to help you create a passed pawn that's a lethal threat for white, because the king there on f2 is such a strong defender.
Yeah.
And if the black rook is not able to make headway, then you've got real problems.
Well, the final tactics are being played in the game between Zavin and Firouzja. If you look at this, it came down to just defense from Zavin. He gave up that c3 pawn and managed to surround that g5 pawn. So his h6 move has eliminated 2 white pawns from the game. As far as defense, when you're defending, your goal is to get rid of the last pawns of the opponent, right? So he gets 2 pawns off the board. That gives Firouzja not a lot to work with in order to convert the advantage of the rook against minor piece, because without pawns on the board, that would be a draw. Knight takes d6 here, holding the e4 pawn, and now f5. And the pressure on e4 is intense. And white's almost out of pawns, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out if white's able to win this, or if he's going to be okay going into a draw. And I think the way that this game started, I think Firouzja will be happy, if he were to go back in time and tell himself, like in the opening, like this is going to be a draw. But this is where you really want to push Zavin, right? Like really make him worried at the least, if you're going to go into this bullet tiebreak. And
I mean, he also has to make sure he doesn't lose, because if black could play like f takes e4 with that bishop still on the long diagonal and kick his bishop on f3 and have 3 compact pawns, it could be really bad for him, actually.
Yeah, and I'm trying to work out all these lines right now. I mean, we know that as soon as this pawn on f2 gets traded, white's not playing for 1 anymore, right? And so It's actually very difficult to see like ways that white continues to try to generate an advantage. And so, I mean, I think that this one's going to probably head towards a bullet tiebreak. I mean, yeah, I don't think I'm too crazy in assuming that.
This rook c1 must have been really clever. I mean, if bishop to a8, did he have something good there? Maybe he just keeps chasing that bishop with rook to not 1, rook to c7 to a7 or something. I don't know. Okay. So the bishop just took. Ooh, and then rook e1.
Do you have to play f3 check here with the idea that if king f3 knight g5 doesn't even work? I don't think it works, does it?
Well, I mean, you could play knight takes f2 even and get a draw at this point. So there's
That's a good
no
point.
danger at all for Zabin. I mean, he can do anything. But your f3 idea is interesting. Like, does that even give him a chance to win? Maybe the king would just back up, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking.
Let's see what happened. Knight takes f2 was played by Zabin with a draw offer, and I think
we're getting our first
the right time to offer a draw.
I think we're getting our first bullet tiebreaker, Group C.
Now you've got no pawns. They've agreed to it. Let's get back to the other exchange position. Man, these games really are twins, right? Each features like one side up in exchange. Okay, so Amonatov made progress on the king side. That's dangerous. And this is where we're at. I bet White thought about bishop c6 for a second there before taking on e4.
Yeah.
This looks like Black has some good winning chances. Depends. I mean, maybe White can play g4 to keep Black's passed pawns from running quickly after rook b3. Only 30 seconds for Savchenko. He's getting low here. He's getting low here, and it's looking tough for him.
Yeah, I mean, the dream structure here for White is you want to play bishop d7, king d6, and c5 all at the same time, right? Because at that point, you're bringing the cows home. But it's going to be really hard to move your king to d6 with this pawn on c4 and then keep this bishop here on b5.
Yeah. Oh, and so now Monatov chose to cover the c-pawn with his king as well by getting control of d7 and d6. Yeah, I think this will probably be a conversion for Amonatov. I think an upset with Black.
Yeah, and
that could make a huge day for the Movers, who already won a match.
Yeah, I mean, that guarantees a 5-point day for the Movers before they even go into the final, because if you move into at least the semifinals, you're guaranteed 2 points in the standings. So, this would be big for Moscow, because if Moscow were to lose to Sao Paulo and then not be able to get top 2 in today's knockout battles, that means that we no better than a 1-point showing in the standings.
Yeah, they're risking a really bad week here, unless there's something that Savchenko can still pull out of the bag there. As Bullet gets underway, Zabin's got White.
Yeah, and I guess technically, since these two are team accounts and they haven't actually played a lot of Bullet in this account, this could theoretically, if Alireza Firouzja loses this, could be the lowest rated player Firouzja's ever lost to in Bullet.
You mean an 1800?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that Zabin really counts as an 1800, no matter what the Armenia Eagles account says.
Well, you always have to root for the technicality.
A cheeky Petrov here from Firouzja, reminding us that he's got draw odds. Maybe it's best not to remind the other player that you've got draw odds in these situations. Like, if they're not too familiar with the format yet,
But I mean, in this case, though, Petrov is still a very complicated opening. Like, just because a Caruana can draw everyone night and day with the Petrov, that doesn't necessarily mean that translates to playing great Bullet chess.
Yeah, that's with 6 hours on his clock. So it's how well the opening holds up here is a different story. And basically now we've got an exchange French kind of structure, not one of the mainline Petrovs. And Alireza, the Bullet specialist, has spent 30 seconds playing 10 moves of simple Petrov positions. So
right, and keep in mind that is with a 1 second increment. So I'm very surprised that the time situation is not the other way around.
Yeah. So far, the position's a little bit promising for White, I think. I'm not an expert on boring positions, so I don't play too much Petrov or exchange French, but it happens now and then. Maybe bishop f4 to keep some more pieces on the board, a little more pressure.
Yeah, now there's going to be a lot of pressure in Firouzja here.
Oh my goodness, instant exchange sack from Zabin.
Yeah, now
careful, Firouzja gets out of the f-file issue with bishop h6. Wow, Zabin's seeing the tactics fast, man.
Oh, but this is actually kind of dangerous too, because if you move the knight, now you have to think about all these rook takes f2 things. But the difference is Zabin has the time, Firouzja doesn't.
Yeah, and now he's thinking it. Now he's giving a good little calculation to knight d5, knight e5, and of course knight d2. Apparently, Here comes the knight to center. I would rather be white here.
Oh, hands down.
These evil knights, knight e4, knight f6. Could the game end with a knight on f6?
Oh, but now queen takes g7, right? Queen takes g7, then the rook on f2 is just hanging. Oh, bishop g7, even smarter.
Oh, he's going for the draw. The draw odds. Look at that calculation. That's basically, it's the same as checkmate, right? He didn't have a mating combination. He just leaves his king dead on g8 and gets that. And there you saw the flash of brilliance of Alireza. 10 seconds against 35-40 this game, under intense pressure, and he just wins it.
Yeah, that's something else.
Wow. And the other game is still going. Still White's putting up some defense here, making this tough. White's got 7 seconds left without the G pawn. Isn't it going to be over? Throw in rook b4 here, maybe. Not needed. Hits the bishop. And back to c4.
Yeah, and 3 seconds left here for Savchenko.
Yeah.
There should be more than enough time for Almanatov, I think. I mean, at this point, you can start pushing the pawns and sack your rook for the pawn and bishop if possible.
Clean as well. King d4 is like the moment of resignation as well. So big point for Almanatov. He's already 3-0 on the day, although 2 of his games were against not his usual level of competition. But this one's huge. I mean, that game was pretty dominating from black throughout, and Savchenko made things look tough with that exchange sack, right?
Yeah,
use that position with the two connected passers that Almanatov couldn't attack or really get at. But then he did a good job activating his rook, getting something on the king side, and eventually brought it home.
Yeah, we've got a few minutes now before we hit our finals. So that means that Alireza Firouzja will be playing Farukh Almanatov, where Boris Savchenko is going to be playing Zavan Andreasyan. Firouzja and Savchenko will both have white in their respective games, so should make for a really interesting final. Are you surprised that Almanatov beat Savchenko, considering what we were thinking was going to happen going into today's matches?
I mean, I had enough question marks in my head that I don't think I would have been too surprised by anything, I think, right? When you're not really sure of what's going to come. But it's definitely got to count as an upset because, the white pieces, the draw odds. I mean, I think that's like a huge factor at this level. So I'm definitely a little bit surprised. It's definitely my prediction that he would go through using that advantage. You thought he could win the whole thing, so I assume you're feeling some shock.
Well, I mean, I'm not feeling a lot of shock here. I mean, we're still getting to know these players. But I mean, the one thing I did tell you before today's match start was that, Farukh Almanatov, I was either expecting him to basically finish fourth or to finish first, right? Like, he's a very streaky player. I've watched him play in several OTB events, on chess.com/events. He's done really well against, top tier players like Andreikin and like some of those other players. So I'm not surprised at all that he actually managed to beat Savchenko here. But
so after a fantastic game like that, does that make him your favorite in the final against Alireza now that he was able to take care of Savchenko with black?
I mean, given the way that he was able to manage his time against Savchenko and what seemed to be a somewhat complicated opening, and the way that Firouzja struggled early in that first game against Armenia, would not surprise me, but I would still have to say at this point, Firouzja seems to have this figured out, right? He knows that he can draw, and he knows that he has the technique to draw completely what seemed like a lost game, right? Like, if we backtrack 5 seconds in that Armenia Sao Paulo bullet game, I mean, it looked like Zavan Andreasyan had that on lock. So
yeah, very
tricky player. I have to give the bullet edge to Firouzja, and because of that, Firouzja's got to be my favorite now. I'm picking Boris Savchenko, I think, on the bottom group. But I mean, hats off to Zavan Andreasyan. We talked about prior to that match how hard it must be to play that match, knowing that you have to win because you screwed up on a technical thing earlier in the day. And
he played an epic rapid game coming out of that.
Yeah, he played epic and rapid, and he should have won the bullet, right? Like, as a manager, you can't complain about the individual performance. You can only complain about the technical challenge that happened in the Live Club match.
Shall we try and confirm that he should have won that before Rook F1 happened, this Bishop H2?
Yeah, I thought Bishop G7 was too cute here. I mean, Queen G7 should just be... Well, Queen G7 might not be enough here, actually.
Queen G7, Bishop G7, then Rook takes D2. I think he would just straight up lose.
Yeah.
So let's see. How could he have won? We'll have to find out later because it's on. The next matches are starting.
So this is our third place match between Boris Savchenko and the Armenian Eagle, Zavan Andreasyan.
Yep. So Tigra is Savchenko for the Moscow Wizards. And then over here, we've got the Capybaras. It's Firouzja with white against Amonatov of the Movers. Amonatov is a King's Indian defense player.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see if the Grunfeld is taking on even more devotees. Nope. Sticking with what he knows. That makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. When we talked about challenges that, Alireza would have with the black pieces, we knew that both Amonatov and Savchenko could pose problems in Alireza Firouzja's opening repertoire. And so I'm going to be curious to see what sideline or what main line does Firouzja choose to play against the King's Indian.
Yeah. And look, we've got a Najdorf Sicilian, poison pawn variation, even queen b6 out of Zavan. And so one trend I'm noticing already in the 4 games we've seen in the rapid section of this knockout is the black players playing really sharp openings. They're not playing openings where they try and hunker down, sort of minimize white's advantage, play for like a draw or, for equality, like you see at first in a lot of tournament games at the GM level. And I don't know if that's saying that these 4 players are all sharp players and that's why they're picking these openings, or if it has something to do with that bullet game, draw odds, sort of like psychology of being on the back foot. Because to a professional player, it feels like a huge disadvantage to go into these mini like knockout games where your opponent has white and you don't get a white and your opponent has draw odds. So I wonder if it has something to do with the format. They're thinking like, we need to go for something a little bit different.
Right. And that's where like they really count on their fans, right? I mean, their fan club numbers each week determine who gets seated where in terms of the overall pairings for the knockout battles. And so, queen e3 check there, not pretty good.
Yeah. So this h6 move forces the bishop off on f6.
This kind of feels like a Champowski a little bit. The pawn structure for black, this idea of G takes f6. And maybe it's just my opening perspective and not being an e4 player here.
That
there's
must
a lot
mean
of
that
lines.
You're more of a Champowski player than an e4 player.
Yeah.
Because for an e4 player, this is standard issue Sicilian structure as well. Rousers and a whole bunch of Sicilians will see G takes f6 from black.
Yeah, I'm used to these positions where my queen's already on h4. And I have basically the exact same position. So it's kind of interesting for me to be looking at it. It's like, wait, didn't white just lose a couple tempi here?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the ideas are going to be the same, right? White's going to try to attack in the center. This king on e8, like, is going to be a constant question for Zavan. But on the plus side for Zavan, he's got all these opportunities to attack on both the king side and the queen side.
Yeah. Now, our King's Indian is also quite a sharp line with an early knight g4, bishop g5. Right, which kind of messes with the normal flow of the central structure. We don't immediately have that white pawn on d5, black pawn coming to f5. That's sort of the classic King's Indian structure. Here, the tension is going to be maintained. White's going to be able to control d4 for a while because black's not playing knight c6. Black's blocked in their bishop with the f pawn. But the white bishop could be on a weird square over here on the king side.
Yeah, and I've actually played this position before with black, but with my knight on a6 as opposed to d7.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these positions look weird because you have a knight on h6, and we're all taught as beginners that knight on the rim is grim. But usually that goes and belongs on f7, like the David Bronstein knight in the King's Indian, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, it's still a very tricky line. And if this knight had been on a6, we're still in like a very theoretical territory. In fact, I believe Grandmaster Eugene Perelstein has a video series on that specific line here on chess.com if you're a premium member. So definitely make sure to go check that out.
Okay, but Amonatov's trying to win the game. He's saying that Alireza has blundered something. He's only got a minute off his clock. He spent 30 seconds though stopping and saying like, "Hey, does e takes d4 mess you up, my friend? I think it does." So his plan is on f5. He attacks the queen with the bishop. He wants to close the trap on the g3 bishop with f4. If white plays queen d6, I think he's thinking f4 anyway. Bishop takes f4, queen takes h4, defending the knight on h6.
I think theoretically b4 is a mistake there. I mean, I could be totally out of my depth here and not know what I'm talking about, but usually you can't go forth with these g5, g4 ideas if the position's not closed unless it works concretely. And we're really early theoretically right now in the King's Indian for it to just work, right? So b4, maybe Amonatov knows something that we don't and thinks that b4 is a waste of time, knows that g5, g4 comes with tempi, and that gives him time to pull this off because after b4, this is all forced.
Yeah, and he's playing this follow-up very confidently. So those 30 seconds that he spent on e takes d4 were enough for him to sort of confirm that his whole tactic was going to work. And Firouzja is going to lose a piece here, I think, unless there's a hole in Aminatov's calculations. But I'm inclined to trust him. That doesn't necessarily mean the game is over, though. The black king side is really open, and white's got 2 pawns against a knight. So
Yeah.
it's not that far away from a scenario that you like sack to get to on purpose, right? Like 2 pawns and an open king for a knight. That's kind of almost a normal thing. So I think I don't think it means we're not going to see a game just because white sort of like blundered this thing. I think it's the difference between like blundering a piece and blundering like a pawn or half a pawn. I don't think white's blundered even a full pawn. So I would say it's still very close, actually.
So I guess the question is, what do you want to do on this move, right? Because now Alireza Firouzja has a choice. Can he play bishop takes f4 and give up the h4 knight? Or does he just say, you know what? I'm going to let a black take on g3. I'm going to play f takes g3, and I'm going to open up things on his king, which means that I have a free move on this move with white to try to improve my position so I have an attack.
If he really likes this knight, then maybe what he wants to do is play a positional move, trying to keep the black pieces from getting out very well. And there were 2 options there. One is c5 to have bishop c4, bishop e6 and stuff. The other would be rook to d1 to have ideas of, like, if he played rook d1, he's got ideas of, like, if black tries to untangle with queen f6, he plays queen c7, right? And he's using his rook to have more pressure, so it's hard for black to untangle the queenside pieces. So yeah, so he decided, sure, he'll leave the knight on h4. And it's not an immediate attack from white. So f takes g3. Oh my god.
Well, this is what I suggested, though, right? Like, this is why you let him play f takes g3, right? So you can play
I thought h takes.
But don't you want to open up the f file since the king's on g8 and black has like no pawns in front of this king left?
I mean, honestly, I was thinking we're pretty far away from an attack, and I was taking this sort of like positionally, like try and, have your 2 pawns, have control of the position, don't let the black pieces get out and onto active squares too quickly, sort of limit them for a while. And depending on how black plays it, because his king is open, it can always switch into being an attack. But white doesn't seem active enough to me to go for a direct attack. And look, now black got all his pieces out and white's not attacking.
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised by rook takes f8 though. Was that actually forced? Rook takes f8?
Let's see. Knight e5. So black just wants to trade things. And where's this queen supposed to go?
Yeah, actually, that's kind of frustrating, isn't it? I mean, when I was trying to calculate this, I was seeing like the idea of playing for bishop c4, but this idea of knight f5, but this move knight e5 for black just kind of freezes everything, actually.
Yeah, kind of kills everything. He's got an outpost. His pieces are coming out, and this position looks like basically prospectless for white. And I was trying to say the piece wasn't the end of the world, but it's based on positional factors. Now it feels kind of like the end of the world to me.
Yeah, I think Aminato has proven himself as our King's Indian expert here.
Gee, the other game has developed really fast as well.
And so for the 5,000 of you guys watching either on chess.com or through our Twitch front page event, you guys are watching the Pro Chess League Summer Series, which you can obviously learn about both on chess.com and our various links that we have currently in our chat. But the key is definitely make sure to click on that Twitch icon so you can come over, follow our channel, and be able to continue watching the Pro Chess League Summer Series every Saturday between now and August 24th as teams prepare for the Summer Series Championships. We've got 16 Pro Chess League teams competing over the duration of this summer, and it's a race. The top 10 teams get into the playoffs, and that's what we're here seeing today. We've got 4 teams here in Group C: Armenia, Moscow, Mumbai, and Sao Paulo, and this is going to set the tone. So if you guys are just new to the Summer Series and aren't sure how the Summer Series works, think of it as like the FIFA World Cup, or think of it as a various group stage tournament where teams are trying to progress the next round.
Yeah, and most important thing is that you can play. I think that's the big difference between this and the normal Pro Chess League season, that the fans can play. Anybody can play, roll up their sleeves, pull out their mouse, and join their favorite team. And right now we're in the knockout section, so there is a segment each week where the top players just represent their teams in a 4-player battle for 3 points in the standings. But there's There's live club matches as well, where you join the club that you want to represent, and we'll have another of those after this knockout. So another opportunity for you guys to play yourselves is coming up in about 35 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. And for those of you guys who are keen on playing in that Sao Paulo versus Moscow fan club matchup, make sure to, stream, blog about your games in that match, tweet about it using hashtag Summer Series so you can be considered for our best fan prize, a $250 prize that we award per group. So definitely make sure that you stay competitive for that.
So look at Zabin's pawn structure. I mean, it's hilarious. Theoretically, it's supposed to be terrible, but he's got doubled pawns with another pawn, like a knight hop away over here. And again, doubled pawns with an isolated pawn, a knight hop away over there. He's got 6 isolated pawns against 5 healthy pawns. But he's really showing the value of this G file in the Rouser structure, or Trompovsky structure for you, I guess. And, this pawn on H4 cramps these 2 white pawns on the king side, means that he can attack G2 all day, means that G2 can't come defend the pawn on F4. And yeah, it's tough for white to do much so far.
Yeah, and I love this move F6 from Zafin, just saying, you know what, I have doubled pawns and they're a strength here. Knight on D3 looks like a nice piece, but it really can't go anywhere. Have fun protecting F4 for the duration of the game. And
yeah, you have that symmetry, right? Or that translation, actually. Technically, this structure has been translated from the queen side to the king side.
If only there was a J file, right? And then we could have doubled pawns in that file as well. But yeah, I mean, white has the E file, but I'm just trying to figure out where is white going to put that rook, and I'm just not seeing it at all.
Right. You're wondering if there's ever a moment for white to play like rook E6, sacking G2, get active by taking F6. But frankly, I mean, the H2 pawn is going to be in such danger when we make that transition, and H3 is coming.
Do we have a result, by the way, in the Mumbai?
It's just won it. Alireza resigned. I mean, this position was just so hopeless. It was only one move after what we saw, right?
Yeah.
Black just came into D2, and it's like, well, I give up. I mean, basically I'm down a piece because the doubled pawn here isn't helping much. So now there's just the E pawn against the knight. Black's controlling the open file, outposted. Just didn't even want to look at this garbage. So
yeah, I mean,
I don't think he put up the best resistance after his blunder. Is that a fair double criticism?
I mean, I think that's a fair criticism, but I think when Alireza looks back at this game, he's going to start wondering, is B4 the right idea? Because this position is a forced result of that move B4. And I think Amanatov nailed it. He knew that he could get to this position because white wasted this move playing B4 instead of kind of playing normally. And bishop to H4, as you mentioned earlier, it's a very awkward move because that bishop on G3 in a closed position is staring at a pawn on E5.
Yeah.
So it's usually not that great. I believe the key games, white usually plays bishop to D2, plays queen to C1, and tries to sack a pawn on C5 to play against the C7 pawn, and Alireza just never got that counterplay.
You do know some stuff about this opening line. Bishop D2.
Yeah, so the idea is bishop D2, queen C1 at some point. After D5, you play for C5, and then black has to reroute this knight from H6 to F7, and sometimes he even plays knight D8 so he can cover the B7 pawn. And reroute to E6. It's a very theoretical line. I'm sure a lot of theories evolved since I've last seriously studied this, but B4 is not one of those moves that suggests that white is intent on changing the structure, and that's really helpful for black in these cases. And that's why I'm surprised to see moves like B4 and Rook C1, moves that are known to be slow in the King's Indian, against someone who's very clearly a King's Indian expert.
B4 tells me that Firouzja thought he had maybe time to play C5 really quickly, trying to crack that pawn structure on E5 that was blocking his bishop, trying to wake up that bishop. And open up the center. But the other problem with this bishop, in addition to hitting E5, is the plan for black in the King's Indian is often to rush these pawns forward, and the bishop got caught in that trap. I guess we should go back to the active game, but big props to Amanatov. 2 upsets with black. The first one, a really tough game. The second one, almost easy.
I mean, he made that seem simple. I'm gonna have to go back and really try to figure out that theory, because I mean that looked like almost a refutation from black. And what that means for Mumbai is a perfect 6-point week. It's the 3rd time that's happened so far this summer series. We're in week 7. The 2 teams so far that have before this that have had a perfect week, it was St. Louis Archbishops in Group A, and then last week Pittsburgh Pawn Grabbers got a much needed 6-point week. So the Mumbai Movers are now on that list. And you can say that maybe it was a little bit of luck with the way the Armenia match turned out, but 6 points. I mean, that's more than halfway to the playoffs.
Yeah. So Savchenko's come up with something. He's put this knight on f3, which then attacks the isolated pawn on h4. That forces Zavin to also defend some things instead of just sort of being in that like boss position where he's attacking things and Savchenko's pieces are all tied up. That said, I still don't see how white really makes much progress overall. I guess he wants to bring his king to f1 or even f2 to defend the g-pawn, maybe even threaten knight takes h4 at some point. And then he wants to go after the d4 pawn. There's still a lot going on here.
Yeah, black is tied up because, I mean, like an intuitive solution might be to play knight b4 and keep that king on d2, but then that pawn on d4 just becomes so weak. And that's why we're saying let's move b4, maybe with the idea of in the future playing like b3 and then trying to, double up white's pawns of his own and then create targets over there on the queen side.
Right. It's also important that knight h4 would defend g2. He can't play like rook h to g8 to force the rook on d1 back to g2 while the king's still too far away, because instead white just plays knight takes h4, covers the g pawn, and next he's coming to f5 and stuff. So b4, king e1, rook g to g8. It looks like Zavin's actually been forced to retreat a little bit. And is he planning to play rook e8 to save his d pawn?
I mean, I don't think you have a choice at this point, right? I mean, you have to eliminate one of the pairs of rooks, so that way the pawn on g2 becomes a little bit weaker. But I mean, it means that you're gonna have to give up some pawns.
We can see b4 was played to stop c3, but it didn't stop c3, right? If we're wondering, like, why does black suddenly play b4 here? Seems slightly random. Well, it's because he sees that in this position, white's going to be ready to play c3 to win this pawn. But maybe he didn't anticipate this move order where white plays knight takes d4 first, and then using this pin, follows up with c3 to win that pawn.
But wait a second here. If black plays a move rook to e8 and allows like rook takes d4 and just plays like king to c6, I mean, isn't that kind of like just like an equalish endgame where black is more than content going to this bullet tiebreaker because this rook on e2 is just pinned?
Yeah, it's still pretty close to equal. I mean, white was down a pawn this entire time. He just had 6 isolated pawns as sort of like this positional counterplay. He was hoping that he could win, 2 or 3 of them and suddenly, gobble, gobble, gobble all the weakies and come out winning. But, Zavin had so much counterplay on the open files around his weak pawns that it was very hard for Savchenko to make that progress. I guess b4, yeah, he probably calculated he wasn't stopping c3. He just wanted to trade one of his double isolated pawns, stay in the game, and continue moving it towards a draw.
Yeah, and for those of you guys wondering, well, if this is a draw, why doesn't Savchenko just play rook takes e8, and just continue playing? Shouldn't that be easy? But the problem with allowing a move like that, rook takes e8 is check. White has to move the king. Let's just say to f2. Well, then black can start to consider a move like rook to e4, where this rook on d4 doesn't really want to take that pawn on e4 because black wants to play the move f5.
Yeah, that would be slightly awkward. So he even has to figure out how to do this. Rook d7, that's what I thought. It would just be some active move with that rook. And now he could go rook d6 if he's content with a draw. He could go rook c7 to c6, probably slightly better. Rook c7, king d3. It's funny, you could see like a certain kind of like perpetual check almost with the black king's attack here. If the white king comes up to f2 after a rook trade on e8, trying to cover his f pawn and e pawn, then you go like rook e2, king f3, rook e3, king f2, and the white king can't get out of that. The black king is so much more active than the white king that it's like black who could play for a win, I think, in general. So
yeah, I think that the exchange of rooks just helps black, because with 2 rooks, like black has to constantly worry about getting mated. But in this case, I mean, you really can't do that much.
This thing is happening. Well, I don't think this is very good for white, so little surprise, but maybe Savchenko had nothing better. You look at the time, 3 minutes against basically 11. We can see that Zavin has been very comfortable this whole game, very confident about what his position allows him to do. Let's see if he takes a quick draw or if he tries to find a way to win. It is hard to ever win these things with black, no matter how good your position looks, because like he's never going to have connected pass pawns. he's never going to have a protected pass pawn.
But okay, if you can cut off white's king, like let's say white plays like king f1 or king g1 here, can't black just play rook c2, walk that king over to e4 and say, all right, like it's probably still equal, but don't you have to worry about the mating net ideas of like king g3? You know, the fact that your king is cut off on the f1 or g1 is not a very great place to be.
It's not a great place to be. If you try and checkmate, I mean, white's always got rook g7 check to kick the king away. And basically what my point about like how hard it is to ever win this with the bad structure despite being active is that if white plays like rook c6 and takes on b6 and loses all 4 of the other pawns, it's like still basically a draw, right? Like,
yeah, that's a theoretical draw.
There's just like so few scenarios where you can actually like win when your pawns are that bad in an endgame, right? So maybe for all the power of his activity and how it's worth a couple pawns, even if he wins a couple pawns, he can't win the game. So it may just be a draw.
I mean, do you think Zavin is more or less okay then? I mean, he played so well against Firouzja in that bullet tiebreaker. It was unfortunate that he drew.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's also got an 8-minute time advantage, which I don't think we've talked about yet. I mean, you kind of want to draw it out at that point.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, maybe see if you can at least make your opponent worry, tire them a little bit. Although Savchenko shouldn't be too tired yet. I mean, he's a professional chess player. These guys have played, for hours before, and this is only an hour into, or less than an hour into the day for Savchenko. But yeah, I mean, I just don't see black ever winning. This move that he played does signal though that he wants to try to. Right. So that does signal what you were saying, Isaac. He's preventing rook to c6 from trading off all his pawns. So it's saying that he would like to somehow win the game. It's like, if you would let me win, I would really like to.
So I guess the one thing that maybe some of the viewers in chat are calculating right now is if, rook to h7, for example, trying to go after this h4 pawn and trying to create this passed outside pawn for white, is Armenia going to be okay there? The problem there, I think, for white is that black is going to win this pawn on c3, and it's a lot faster to win with this b6 pawn than it is to try to push this h pawn up the board. And so in this case, like it's just not going to be fast enough. Not to mention your rook on h4 is cut out. You need 2 more moves just to put it behind the passed pawn. In the meantime, black's playing rook b6, and it's just game over.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure that this position is game over, but it's definitely scary for white and like super illogical, right? Because of all the black pawns here, these 4 pawns, the one that's like a candidate to win the game for black is the b6 pawn. That's the pawn that has like the best potential because the white king is completely boxed away from it. And all it takes is for black to get the c pawn, and that b pawn could be a winner. So he plays the obvious move, honestly, is just king f2, just a waiting move. You just got to have that Sitzfleisch as a GM. If king to e4, he'll play rook c4 check and then move his rook back to c7.
Yeah.
So I think the plan is just to sit right now for white. A minute to play king f2 is a little worrisome, but 2 minutes should still be fine for a strong GM to play this endgame out.
And I wonder if what we're seeing right now is probably the last think from Zavin Andreazian before he extends a draw offer. Because, I mean, there's a lot of different waiting moves that black could play if he's trying to play for a win, right? Like, he could play like king c2. He could play like king d2. He could play like rook e8 or whatever. Well, maybe not rook e8. He could play rook e2 and then repeat once and then go back, right? But he's probably thinking right now and just trying to figure out, like, okay, what's my plan? Do I have a plan? And if he doesn't have a plan, then he's probably going to make a move and then offer a draw.
I think there's still a little bit more to work with. So I don't think that Savchenko is totally out of the woods. I still see like b5 and then maybe rook e4 to c4 as an idea at some point. And well, he goes for something else first, but maybe like even if you see this b5 idea, if that's what you want to go for, maybe you play a couple more waiting moves first, see if Savchenko will get down to 1 minute or less than a minute before you go for your actual idea. C4 from white prevents it now.
Absolutely. And I've actually got a developing story for you that's coming up in 23 minutes, which is the Sao Paulo Capybaras matchup with the Moscow Wizards. There are currently, and I'm not lying about this number, exactly 100 players registered for this live club match. It will be the biggest live club match ever hosted in the Pro Chess League Summer Series so far. But
holy cannoli.
Look at the number of players who are playing for Moscow. There are like... I
can't. Every time I scroll, it like refreshes my scroll wheel.
It keeps going down. And that's just amazing to me that, Sao Paulo, the hype was all around being able to bring in all of these, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fans, but it only matters if they actually show up, right? I mean, they've got something like 700 fans in their fan club. Moscow has half
700.
of that.
Yeah.
And wow, I mean, like,
Jeez, the
obviously
Russian
we've got a game going, and there's still a lot of time before fans join. And I'm not trying to say like you should join one club over another or anything, but no one could have possibly predicted this. This is like, if Moscow wins this, they have to be the favorite to win the group. Like, if they bring out this kind of turnout every week, absolutely.
That's crazy. And I mean, Sao Paulo is like lucky to have a couple of the Armenian players, high-rated players, join their team, right? They've got Kanya and Artak here up on their second and third boards. But where are the Brazilians?
And I'm looking at the lineup, right? I mean, they've got NK123, Henricum, Art Vega. That's great. Those guys all played for Armenia last round, right? Like, you can't just piggyback off of their fans. So I'm really surprised, and we're gonna have to keep our eyes on this as we get closer and closer to the start of the event.
Yeah, they've got the Seattle Slugger on their team too. But where are the Portuguese, Brazilians? All right, our game continuing. C4, I think, was a good defense by White. It kind of ruled out that one idea that I actually had for Zavin. So maybe waiting with King D2 wasn't so useful. Oh my goodness, no. He had a whole plan. He wanted to get behind and win every white pawn.
This is actually very difficult to beat, I think. I mean, this rook on c7 looks like it's an active piece, but it's this c pawn is actually kind of in the way of this rook of being active.
Well, it's coming to c6 now. It's going to start cleaning up from the other side. Black's going to play king f1 and start cleaning up from g2. Oh, you don't even want to throw in that check, do you? Maybe you do.
Yeah, but I mean, Black's going to get to h3 first. I mean, that's going to be a huge problem, I think, for White. I mean, this game just got a lot more complicated, and who has the time? It's Zavin Andreazian here.
Well, the thing is, like, White was going to be able to capture pawns just as fast, even without surrounding them the way Black did. And then the Black king on e1, his activity is a little bit questionable.
Yeah, that's true as well. I mean, this king is not exactly contributing to the fight. It's got to work its way either over to g2 or over towards the queen side. But
look at this trap, Isaac. Rook f4, check, king e3, resigns.
Brutal.
Do not.
That's the kind of mistake I might make.
So he wants to grab the b6 pawn from here. He can always bail with rook b1 check to deal with that h pawn. The Black king is awkward, and he's going to start running the c pawn. Yeah, so the Black king needs to get over to g2 or somewhere good like that. Run the h pawn. I'm still calling this a draw. Still calling this a draw. And 20 minutes, Sao Paulo, 20 minutes to show.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite impressive, but I mean, 105 people have registered for the match, and that in and of itself is a Pro Chess League Summer Series record. We've never had that many players register for an entire match before. Whether or not they all get to play will be, a different story based on how many people actually show up for Sao Paulo. But I mean, 105 people, I'm really looking forward to that match.
Right. Right now it's like 70 to 30-ish, according to our super counter Sepper, who did what none of us wanted to do. Went down and counted that whole scrolling list.
Yeah.
All right. King to e5. King to e5 from Savchenko. This is potentially an attempt to win the game by defending his f-pawn.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm thinking right now is like he's probably trying to think about after rook c3 if he wants to continue trying to push that f-pawn or if he just wants to put his rook behind the h-pawn. Because honestly, I think it's easier for White to draw this than for Black at this point, right?
Yeah, I agree. All right.
Okay,
and that said,
as we say,
it is a draw by any measure. Rook c3 was the move to try and draw the game by going after the c pawn rather than running the h pawn while White, takes on b6, gets his rook into defensive position, then has two passed pawns. So I think eliminating one was very good because now basically a lot of scenarios come down to White takes on b6, Black takes on c4, the f pawn runs, the h pawn runs, and each player has to sack a rook or trade a rook for the pawn. Because neither king's in position to stop it. But yeah, that just all simplifies out to a draw that way.
Yeah, for sure. And now we're going to get our bullet tiebreaker in between Savchenko and Zavin Andreazian. We haven't seen Savchenko yet in a bullet tiebreak, but we have seen Andreazian. In this case, Andreazian would get white, and he very clearly seems to like having the white pieces. And it was unfortunately he drew to Alireza. I know we said that before, but I'll say it again. I mean, if he can play like that against Savchenko, he's got really good winning chances.
Yeah. Isaac, we've got Alireza in chat saying, hey, join this match, buddy.
Yeah, and I mean, I figured it was going to be the other way around. Like going into this match, I figured that fans would want to play with Alireza. You know, he doesn't play a lot of rapid games, so to even be on his team at the same time, I thought that would be surprising. But you know, the Russian fans, I've been keeping an eye on their club. Very active club. It's a very tight knit group. A lot of I'm assuming players from Moscow and nearby in Russia. They did a very good job recruiting, and it's clearly showing.
Yeah, I mean, their club has 300 some people, and like 70 of them are already in here. So yeah, that's a very good percentage.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so here's our bullet tiebreaker, and now we see e4 from Zavin.
I see it. King's Indian attack. Yeah, Zavin plays these. He plays these. He's got a lot of experience with it. Also has experience with the French defense, so he knows both sides of what's up here.
I've never seen this move bishop c5 here before. Usually I see bishop e7, but then again, I usually don't see knight c6 either. Usually black plays for c5.
Yeah, this is a way to play this. You can play e5 if you ever need to as black as well in these positions.
Ooh, I like that move, bishop a6.
Yeah, bishop a6 is part of the plan. This is a thing against the King's Indian. I've seen this before. Zavin has too. I mean, he's seen all of these things before. Yeah,
one key thing to notice though, considering the time control, unlike his game against Firouzja, Zavin does not have a massive time advantage now.
Yeah, this knight on g4 is a problem guy actually. Knight h4 looking at him. All right, so fg, queen g4, gh4, queen g7 is already in view. And then if queen f8 or rook f8, there's mate on d7. So black couldn't take that piece sack. Instead, holds on to the knight for the moment with h5. That makes sense.
This is actually kind of dangerous for white because a lot of things are hanging right now. c4, g5.
Yeah, black's got bishop c4 for his counterplay and goes for it instantly. Whoa. Complications here. Some complications.
Yeah, and it's kind of critical that Andriazian tries to find a way to win this, because if he winds up losing, it's a 0-point week for the Armenia Eagles.
Yeah, but winning in exchange is almost always a bad idea. Right? The bishop comes to f1. He's threatening like rook c1, bishop b5 and stuff. All right, good.
You solve that by sacrificing both exchanges.
Uh-oh, queen f7. The queen's coming in. Oh, but there's f2. You cannot take that rook. Oh, he notices in time and doesn't take it. Good call.
But I mean, he's down so much material now. I mean, this is not going to be easy.
Gets the knight back in the game. It's only exchange. What is that? What is that? Does he have the knight trapped on g6? Is that his plan? No, he doesn't even play king d6.
I think he's trying to flag Zavin, but I feel like that was too early because now you're giving him a lot of potential counterplay.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to flag him here yet. Uh-oh. That e-pawn is tough to stop. Oh, instantaneous. Oh. That's it. He's got him. Oh, the king. Good call. Bishop takes c6 is possible, right? And taking b5. Gets a2 at the end. Oh my gosh. Could be drawish, but knight f2. Ooh.
I mean, that rook on h2 is stuck.
It is quite stuck. And the king's coming in for the meal. Coming in for the meal. Black's going to bring his king to a2 for counterplay there. What? Why is the h5 pawn suddenly important?
Yeah, I was very confused by that. Maybe his thought...
I am worried about your priorities, man. G6.
G6. What? Okay, well, this works too, but...
It's like some kind of weird puzzle.
Oh. Wait.
H4? No, it was like an endgame puzzle. Oh my goodness.
That's disgusting.
So Savchenko seems to win the game, although I'm not going to say that it's over yet with that craziness. If that a-pawn gets to a1, I will say it's over.
I think it's over. I mean, that's a free knight. Wow.
Whoa. That sequence blew my mind, Isaac. What? That tactic with like his rook being trapped and then he wins? I don't understand why Zavin was going after the h5 pawn.
Yeah, that really baffled me.
Like, what was the scenario here? I mean, I guess he wants to play he wants to play g4, king g3 to win the game, right?
Yeah.
So he plays bishop f7, takes the pawn, then he can play g4 and king g3. But this b pawn is just too much counterplay. So He gets on h5. b3 is played. Maybe you should trade one of those pawns instead of playing a3. I don't know. a3. God, it even costs you a tempo, right? Like you could take, and then reposition your bishop. That's got to be winning for white.
I mean, I thought this was a clear win.
That would have been a clear win. Trade one of the pawns on the queen side. The rook is trapped. Actually, maybe even g4 first is better. So black doesn't have this g4 trick to get his rook out. g4, b2, bishop g6. There it is. Clear, 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 clear. All right. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to have the prodigy Firouzja Alireza with us for an interview. We're going to have a match, the biggest live club match yet of the summer series between the Moscow Wizards fan club and the Sao Paulo Capybaras fan club. So we'll see you in a minute. Join one of those teams in the meantime, and be right back.
Добрый вечер, уважаемые дамы и господа. Я, Владимир Добров, приглашаю вас вступить в фан-клуб московских чародеев, поддержать Россию на важном соревновании, которое будет проходить этим летом на платформе Ческом. Pro-Chess Лига. Очередной сезон, в котором будет бороться целых 16 команд с разных континентов, примет совсем скоро начало. И я прошу всех любителей шахмат, кто хочет нас поддержать, вступить в фан-клуб московских чародеев, принять участие, внести свой непосильный вклад своим интеллектом и попытаться помочь нам пробиться как можно дальше. Следите за новостями в фан-клубе Mumbai Movers, вступайте, играйте в шахматы и побеждайте. Всем пока.
Welcome back, everybody. We've just got 6 minutes until the club match between the Sao Paulo Capybaras and the Moscow Wizards. And I am so excited to finally meet Grandmaster Alireza Firouzja. Thank you for being with us, Alireza.
Yes, sure.
I've been a fan of yours since you were 12 years old. And I saw you playing the Benoni in the Iranian Championships, which you won at age 12. How do you feel about the Benoni now?
Not sure.
I have a love-hate relationship with it. So just now, I noticed that you've played over 100 FIDE rated games this year. That's a pretty intense schedule. Do you ever get tired playing so much?
Yeah, on that period, it was 2 months ago, and it was very hard, of course. But now, each month I play a tournament. So, of course, that 2 months was very tiring, but now it's okay.
Okay, so normal for you would be one tournament per month, and when you play 2 or 3, even you get tired.
Yeah, it should be normal for everyone.
Cool. You also play a lot online. Do you prefer playing online or in live tournaments?
I don't know. I am easy with both. Online is more fun because you are sitting at home and just play. But tournament is much harder. You should travel there. And both are very fun, of course, but I prefer online, I think.
All right. Nicer to just play online in your pajamas from home with your snacks ready.
Yeah.
I also have a question about your team switch. I mean, I'm not surprised that many teams would want you on their team, but you played for the Sopranos in the regular season, and now the new team, the Capybaras, have recruited you to help them in the summer series and help them get into the Pro Chess League through qualifying for next season. How do you feel about switching teams? How did you like the Sopranos? How did that switch happen?
Of course, Sopranos also was a very great team. They did very well, I think, in the last Purchase League. Okay, they didn't get top 4, but anyway, they played good chess. So yeah, and I am also very happy with the new team. It has a great captain, and yeah.
Would you ever like to see an Iranian team in the Pro Chess League? Would you like to play for an Iranian team, or are you happy playing for anybody?
Of course, if Iranian team happens, it will be very nice. So we should see. It may happen, of course. We talked about it. It's not for sure, but it may happen.
All right, cool.
So Alireza, one final question here. This is going to be the first event where not only are you playing in like a Pro Chess League Summer Series event, you're also counting on your fans to be able to score points for you as well. You know, your fans, I'm sure they've been watching you a lot. I know that you stream and they're watching you there. What advice would you give for your fans today as they're about to take on, you know, a very strong Moscow Wizards team?
Yeah, of course, we need the fans to join the team. We really need that. And it's a very important match, I think. It can be very helpful to join our team, and we should see, of course. They are also a very strong team. They have lots of players, so it will be a very hard match.
Cool. Well, good luck with that. We're looking forward to watching your games. We enjoyed your play already in the knockout, and hope to see you again in the future.
Yes, thank you.
All right. So we've just got 3 minutes now before the start of what will be the biggest ever Pro Chess League Summer Series live club match so far this summer series.
Another 30 players have joined.
And 39 players. Keep in mind the previous record was 78 players playing in the St. Louis versus Chengdu matchup that started the Pro Chess League Summer Series. This is almost double that. And, you know, just the amount of fan turnout here is, you know, absolutely crazy as we're like 60 seconds out from the start of the match. And I mean, David, I mean, like, did you ever envision something like this happening where there's so many players playing?
No, I tried to
end any match.
I'm sure you've done the same thing. I tried to go into the fan clubs to like help me make my predictions and see like which club had like activity in their like chatter and chat, and like who's getting people ready, who knows what time the match is at. That can be pretty important in deciding the match sometimes. If half your fans show up an hour late or early or something. And the Moscow club is in Russian, so I couldn't really follow what was going on there very well. And I am taken by surprise by this massive turnout from them. You know, we know that Krikor has been so active getting the Capybaras fan club fired up. And yeah, I mean, I'm taken aback. The Wizards must have done some kind of other Russian stuff. I don't know, Facebook, what?
Yeah, I mean, I know that Vlad Dobrov and I believe Mikhail Lushenkov were both actively advertising the Moscow Wizards fan club as well. And one thing that we've seen teams do that they've been really successful at is having, you know, local players that are under this 2200 rating range and recruiting them to play. We saw Reykjavik do it with a lot of success back in Group B. And I'm looking down the line, and there's a lot of 1700s playing people who are 1400. And as we move further down, that rating difference only continues to grow towards the bottom boards. And so even though there's a lot of players from Moscow who might not be able to play today just because of how many fans there are from Moscow, you know, they did their team a major service by making this very difficult for Sao Paulo.
Yeah. I tried to do the same thing, by the way, Isaac. I tried to, you know, contact a bunch of like, you know, 1900, 2000, 2100 local players when San Francisco was playing their matches, but only like one of them ever played.
Yeah, and it's difficult, right? I mean, like being able to
get them there.
It's one thing to recruit them. It's another thing for them to also win as well. I've seen it work exactly twice so far this summer series. Reykjavik in basically every single match for the duration of the summer series. And then Pittsburgh during last week's match, I went back and I looked through all of the usernames. A lot of those guys are regulars at the Pittsburgh Chess Club, and they're all over 2,000. And that was one of the reasons why they were able to blow out Barcelona in the final week. Those are the only two cases where I've seen teams actively recruit local players. And let's put Moscow on that list now. That's 3 teams. And I mean, Sao Paulo is going to have a lot of work cut out for them. And if they don't keep this match close, they're going to have a stern talking to from Krikor, I imagine.
Man, I bet Dobrov's stream is pretty live right now, huh? There's probably a lot of people there.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be a major indicator there. And if you want to watch him, he's over on Tortuga Chess, streaming the match in Russian as we are underway here between Alireza, Firouzja, and Boris Savchenko, the only match that we have, you know, not seen yet so far for the, you know, between the top 4 players.
Yeah. I'm going to pop open a couple other games because we're going to check out Kanya and Artok later, who we've already seen today. We're going to check out a bunch of these games when we get a chance. Well, Alireza thinking a little bit here at the start. So let's see what we've got.
Yeah, and you know, we had 140 people registered for this match, and only 107 of them got paired. And that just goes to show the disparity between both the Sao Paulo and the Moscow fans in terms of turnout.
Here's an idea that you may not have seen much before. A3, B4 on moves 2 and 3 against the Sicilian. I mean, the idea is very logical. You're trying to distract the C pawn so that you can play D4 and gain the center. B4 without A3 would be the wing gambit. That most of us have seen. At least if you play the Sicilian, you'll have run into it once or twice in your life. Here you're trying to do it without sacking that pawn. But I think the best approach from Black would be just to leave the pawn on B4 on C5 and not take on B4 probably.
Yeah, I mean, this line, if Black knows his theory, is very dangerous for White to even consider playing. I think like the one case where I would say it's okay for White to play was, I don't know if you're following the U.S. Junior Girls Championship, but I believe it was Rachel Lee who started her game with 1A3, knowing that Black is not a Sicilian player. If Black plays C5, thinking that's a nice structure to be able to play for the center, then E4, and now it's a Sicilian where, you know, Black doesn't really know the theory. I know that she went on to go on and lose that game, but that's one of the cases where you'll usually see this kind of opening setup is actually through 1A3.
I'm going to point out like how good Black's control over D4 was at the start of this game. So I don't think that strategy really worked. But then surprisingly, Black takes on B4 at some point and runs the H pawn at White. Nice and violent. And I think that H pawn rush has given Manukyan a little bit of an advantage here out of the opening for Black.
Right. And it's worth noting, we talked about records earlier in the show. This means that Artek Manukyan is the first player in Pro Chess League history to have ever played for 4 different Pro Chess League teams.
This is now his 4th. That's right.
This is 4th.
And look, we've got another first. These, by rapid chess standards, Savchenko and Firouzja are playing a correspondence game right now, right? They're playing like vote chess, like 2 minutes per move to play e4, c5.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Firouzja wanted to take his time after that interview or something, but now b4.
Whoa, the Russians are all on the b4 train today.
Wing Gambit.
Wing Gambit. And this is actually something that I've played a lot in Blitz, Isaac. You play knight f3 first, right? And then if black plays like knight c6, you do not play the Wing Gambit. But if they play d6, that's actually the best scenario to play the Wing Gambit. Out of any Sicilian position I know, this one's the most reasonable. Once black's committed to this restrained d6 move in the center. And, well, very bold by Savchenko, bringing out this opening against Firouzja.
I honestly have to say, I kind of like this opening for White. I mean, considering how we got here, I feel like this is justified, right? I mean, White's going to play d3, and to me, this just looks like an English where black has no central control.
Yeah, I mean, what they do have is an extra pawn, which they can eventually put somewhere, maybe on e5 to block that annoying bishop on b2. We'll see whether Savchenko goes d4 or d3. d4 would really give him a good position in the center, but block the bishop a little bit. But it lets the other bishop come to d3, right? And pawn to d3 would block his f1 bishop. So yeah, I think going for more space makes sense. And immediately taking even more to make sure his b2 bishop stays open. That means that Savchenko was concerned that bishop d3, d5.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point.
Would not be totally thrilling for him. I mean, then White would play c5 to stop bishop takes b4 probably. And you get kind of like a locked center. Space advantage on the queen side. You know, missing a pawn from a Panov. And it looks totally playable. I don't think it would be horrible. But his judgment, plays d5. Now he's got lots of diagonals for his bishops.
Yeah, I mean, I'm imagining bishop d3 here, castles, put the rook on e1, and then just go after h7 and g7. Okay, bishop e2. But I mean, you still have this idea of being able to play for a kingside attack. And, you know, Firouzja is going to have to get creative here to find counterplay because his extra pawn is an a pawn, and that doesn't exactly have a break that's going to help black in the short run.
Yeah, no, it's going to take quite a while for that a pawn to be felt. So he's got to try to fight on even footing, but he's not on even footing in the center. But I mean, he's going to have to try and like meet White with the pieces toe to toe in the center of the board. And maybe eventually as pieces get traded, he can make a pass pawn on the queen side later on. But right now he lacks space, and it looks like a slightly tough position to play for black.
Yeah, I mean, I like this move knight d7 though, because now the idea is if this knight on c3 moves, there's always bishop to f6. So I mean,
the knight on c3 did move, but it tried to stop bishop f6.
Right, but simplifications here I think are going to be generally okay for black, because keep in mind black is up a pawn, so all these trades are just going to get rid of White's most developed pieces. I imagine queen d2 or something like that. Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, he's catching doubled pawns off of it.
No, that's true. So that's a good point.
So now he's going for rook c7. I imagine rook c8 must be played. Then when he takes, black can take back with the rook because of the back rank. That's key for Alireza. That's key. So he doesn't want to have to play a move like knight recaptures on c8, because then White would play rook c1, rook c7, and have a lot of compensation for that pawn. But yeah, the timing here looks okay for Firouzja.
Yeah, I was really surprised.
Play bishop g4, maybe sack the d pawn. Then the knight covers c7, so he doesn't get the rook c7 move he wants. Oh, so Savchenko just has to admit his position's not that good and move away from the b file. And then a brilliant positional move from Firouzja. I was about to say Fireza. It's like half Alireza and half Firouzja. F5, trying to deal with this light squared bishop. Don't let it come to g4 and start taking away c8 from his rooks.
I think the other thing I like about this move f5, it gives black this opportunity to one, play king f6, but there's also maybe an idea later of playing knight d7, knight f6, or knight d7, knight e5. And that f5 pawn is actually really important in terms of both supporting the e4 square and helping repel, as you mentioned, this bishop, from fighting in the center. So
yeah,
I was surprised that Savchenko just traded so quickly. Like as soon as like this move knight d7 got played, I thought white needed to stop there because this endgame is very clearly not good for white.
Maybe he overlooked that back rank thing, and because he played rook c1 quickly, right? And then on rook c8, he's like, oops, and moves his rook off of c1, right? So I think he may have just played a little bit too fast and thought that he had rook c7 and forgot that basically rook c8 black could take with the rook instead of the knight because of the back rank. I think that may have been like sort of the key little tactical point of this entire game.
Great.
But yeah, all right. I mean, the a7 pawn is still backward. He still has his opportunities, but the problem is even if he wins back the a7 pawn at this point, the knight's looking better than the bishop, the black king's looking better than the white king, and black can sort of win the game off other factors instead of that a pawn. So
yeah, I mean, black might be thinking about knight takes f3 here with the idea that if rook takes f3, that gives black a move to move the rook to like c8 with the idea of rook c2.
How about rook d5?
Or even rook d5, right? So like there's so many options that Firouzja has now that, maybe the computer won't say it's the best move, but it's good enough to keep going.
Yeah, maybe a5 now.
Yeah.
Now he's got two different pass pawns for white to deal with. I mean, and the a pawn's even getting to a5 because of that rook on the 5th rank. That was like a big part of why he chose to go this way.
Yeah, I mean, this is already pretty tough. I mean, I guess that the best bet now, right, is like how much more time are we guessing Firouzja spends on this game, right? Like knowing that he's such a great bullet player and this position is so strong for black. Do you think he spends more than 60 seconds and gets down to 5:45, for the remainder of this game?
Yeah, I think so. I think he'll spend some time playing good moves here.
It looks like he's already in pre-move mode, though.
It's not that easy to do. Well, I mean, he could predict king h1, but he spent 20 seconds choosing to go after the f pawn like this. He wants to get the d pawn running, but anytime he does this, he has to think about rook h back to a4.
Yeah.
So it's not easy yet. I mean, maybe it's a lot easier for him than for me, but I would need a lot of time still to play this endgame out.
Yeah, for sure. And it's worth noting that, Moscow has a 16-5 lead. We knew that, they had a lot of strong players, but they're already up by 11. I believe most of these results are occurring on the lower boards, and that's where the points are coming from.
Those are the boards that go faster.
But Sao Paulo needs a 12-point comeback now to be able to put points on the board.
It's like an instant landslide from the Wizards, and man, have they showed up today. All right, so the king has come out. The king has come out to defend f2. That took away the rook g3 option for white. So that's why Firouzja couldn't play king g6 before. I'll just show. Like in this kind of position, if he plays king g6, white just plays rook g3 check, king over, and then can take h7. Or just play rook a3 repeating, right?
Right.
So he plays the check first. When the king comes to g3, then he defends his h-pawn, gains more space with the h-pawn.
Well, that's really good technique with this move h5.
Yeah. All right. So white's still gunning for rook g3 check. Will he put his pawn on h4? He will. These weak pawns are trying to defend themselves by rushing forward. Often that just makes things weaker and weaker. If king f3 attacks the pawn with the a rook, then king g5 can be played for black.
Yeah. I mean, on one hand, when you look at the position, it's like, okay, what's black's next move? But that's actually the wrong question here. I think the right question is, what is white's next move? And with almost every single legal move that white has, he gives up something, right? I mean, you really don't want to move forward. You're after your g-pawns. Your king's kind of stuck here on f4. Black can always waste a move with like king f6 or king g6 back. So even though it might not look like black has like an immediate threat, that's not the problem. The threat is that white is getting very close to Zugzwang.
Well, if white needs to, they should be able to shuffle the rook on like a2 and a3 or something without giving up more terrain or territory.
But isn't a problem for white here that black could play rook b2 at any moment? So that rook really needs to stay on a2, no?
So you're saying if the rook ever shuffles back to a3, then rook b2, then white plays king f3, defending f2. And you have to go back to b5 to defend the a pawn.
Yeah, I guess you don't have time to play king g5.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. If you give up the A pawn, then the margin for winning is starting to disappear. Yeah, I was thinking this might be the thing he would try and do. Some situation where if rook takes a5, he's got rook check on the 4th rank, rook check on the 3rd rank. And here, in fact, it's checkmate because he went to the E file. Very nice. So he gets another weakening out of white's kingside pawns, and then he could play rook b4 check and get 1 rook off the board. That's almost certainly what he will actually do.
Yeah, I think that's the right call.
And then get his rook back behind the passed pawn, and then I think he's won it. I guess he could do it faster than 5:45, like you were asking. Once he gets to that, I think he'll definitely know what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, he gets with a 2-second increment every move. I think there's a very good chance that he finishes this game having spent less than a minute from that critical position. He still has this move rook b4 check here, by the way.
He still has rook b4 as like a checkmate, so that's why he's leaving the a pawn hanging. He's is he thinking of weaving some kind of a mating net? Huh. Interesting. It's hard to imagine mating white as long as that pawn on f3, rook on the 4th.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem in terms of creating a mating net is that rook on e8 kind of needs to stay there to keep this king cut off, but you can't really mate white with this rook on b5 alone. And so that's what we're seeing here. Now, g4, this is kind of interesting. Black has a choice now, en passant or take on g4 or just kind of leave it, right?
Right.
I don't think you can really afford to leave it. Like rook b4, for example, rook b4, a b4, and then just g takes f5, and now things get a little bit tricky. So I think you have to make a decision about this pawn now.
Yeah. Maybe fg4, king g4, going after the h pawn for some counterplay, but it's quite slow. And then you could play rook to c8 as he finds another way.
Yeah.
All right. And Savchenko just guarding that 4th rank against rook b4. He's completely given up on the idea of like rook a2 and attacking the a pawn because he just doesn't have a good way to deal with the rook b4 move.
Wait, isn't rook c5 here though? Like, wouldn't that have been pretty strong? Because like, what does white actually play at that moment after rook c5? Like, he doesn't actually have a lot of good moves left legally.
Well, black's got if rook g5, king h4, rook to b8 here, white can actually get out of the mating net with rook g4 and just
tricky
right out. Oh, rook g5 was played. All right, so maybe f5 first to keep him boxed in, right?
Right.
All right.
And then rook g1 perhaps here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so now there's like a huge threat of just mating him there, huh?
And by the way, we've got a 20-point lead in the match now with Moscow Wizards up 29-9.
Wow, that's
just.
I don't see that coming back.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sao Paulo needs to find their high points from this match. I'm sure that they've got a few fans who are going to go 2-0 today. They've got a lot of really good players from Armenia playing for them, but they're going to need to add to that total and maybe try to find some local players from Brazil to play next week.
Yeah. Yeah, they're going to have to find something. They're going to have to find something more. And everybody's going to have to find something more. Whoever's playing Moscow is going to have to find something more next week, right? Because with like the showing that their club brought today, there's no fan club we've seen that could handle them.
Yeah, I mean, Mumbai is probably the only one that has a chance of even coming remotely close to being able to catch up. But I mean, just think about this from a standings perspective, right? Let's say Moscow gets 3 points for this. They got 1 point from the knockout battle. So that's 4 points in the standings. Armenia got 0. Mumbai got 6. Sao Paulo is going to get 2. Sao Paulo is like in a must-win situation for next week. But if both Moscow and Mumbai can, win and get at least 3 points in the following week, it's going to be very difficult for Sao Paulo and Armenia to catch up, which means that next week is basically do or die week for them.
Yeah. All right. So the H pawn was captured by Savchenko without totally losing the game. So I don't think Firouzja got exactly what he wanted. I think he had a mating net and he didn't. And he didn't actually have it, right? Because he gave up that H pawn. And as far as just trading a rook, he had other opportunities to trade a single rook with rook b4 check already, 10, 15 moves ago. So now, let's see. Let's see if he can still win this. It looks like the white king is headed for d4. But if he comes to h5, he'll hold the line. And if black plays king g6, king f6, then Savchenko will run his king to d4.
Yeah,
Rook
this is.
d4. I always have to wonder, rook d4, a4, rook d5, a3, rook d1, a2, rook a1, rook a3 check, king here, king h4. And white can probably lose that endgame. So probably not a good idea to go after d5 yet.
And what's worth noting there is if black has the A pawn and the C pawn, that is a known rook and pawn winning endgame if white has no pawns at that point. And the idea there is if the white rook is on A1 and the king goes to F2, the rook is just going to simply slide across. Well, white plays rook takes A2, you play rook H2, and you skewer the king to the rook. And so,
good point. I don't have that up yet. Hopefully our viewers can remember what that position looked like.
Right. But I think the one thing that Alireza really wishes here is that his D pawn were a C pawn, right? Because if it were a C pawn, he could consider playing rook C8 and then allowing rook takes A5 and making a bolt for it with this king being so far. But with it on D5, the white king is actually within reasonable range. It's going to be able to protect both the F pawn and stop this pawn on D5. And that just adds one layer of complexity, I think, for this puzzle that Alireza needs to win.
Let's show how important one tempo can be. If he went for D4, right? Rook takes D4, A4. White can blockade the pawn on A2 instead of on A1 compared to when white himself went after the D pawn. And now he can't get as much space with his rook to take away squares from the white king on the third rank and ensure his own king winning the game.
Right.
All right, so he goes rook g8 check, king f2, rook a8, king g2. That's a repetition. I think he's running out of ideas.
Yeah, I think the problem,
a miraculous defense from Savchenko.
I don't know if it was defense or just like a missed opportunity for black. And I think the problem that Firouzja is having now is that this king on h4 is not an active player in the game. Every single square that looks like it would be quote unquote moving forward is kind of occupied, and he legally can't play king g4, king g3, king h3. So unless he's willing to walk his king all the way around to c5, it's going to be very difficult for him to make progress.
Yeah, he'll have to at some point. Ooh, king f3. Another mating net idea is introduced. If king h3, then rook a1, threatening mate, and he can't get out that way because of the f pawn. And then if he goes king h2, there's rook a2. Right? If his king goes to h3, then rook back to a1. And if the king goes to g1, then rook a1, yeah. King h2 and back. So let's see what they've done. d4 has been played. He took it. He's using the a pawn to try and create a scenario where he can now take on h3. So he picked his moment to push the d pawn.
Yeah, actually, that's an important moment. Although this move, rook d7, makes things a little bit murky.
Checkmate. Very nice. That was a key point. He threatens checkmate. King comes back. Now he can go to d2. And the black king doesn't capture on h3. See, that's fantastic defense. We got to give Savchenko some serious credit here for a job well done.
And one thing I do want to point out, we know that Moscow's more than likely going to get the 3 points here, but they just broke the record for most points scored in a live club match this summer series.
Already, wow.
The record before was held by the Chengdu Pandas when they beat, unfortunately, your San Francisco Mechanics in a 46-28 win. But Moscow has shattered that record. It is now 49.5 to 13.5. And there are...
How many points did Chengdu score?
They had 46.
46?
Yes.
That's a lot. That's a lot, too.
There are still dozens of games left in this match. Like, there are still plenty of opportunities. Like, Moscow could very easily find themselves hitting 60 and more.
The Wizards are racking it up. And, I mean, the Capybaras are fighting back, too, here and there. It's not just like a whitewash, but there's just so many Wizards. So many Wizards.
Yeah, I mean, the real problem, I think, for Sao Paulo is the top boards are actually doing okay. It's those bottom boards where that rating separation really starts to happen because of the crowding out for the Moscow team. And that's why the scoreline, you see it now, it's 53.5 to 13.5. I can't even tell you the scoreline because by the time I'm done saying it, Moscow scored another point.
There's just so many games going all the time. Let's see. Quick moment here from 01 Roman for Moscow playing knight d5 here. Pretty exciting in this sort sort of hedgehog Sicilian type position. Does this work here? Normally it's done when there's a piece on c6 that you can win back off of this pin. So what's his plan here? Just to get a nice outpost?
But I mean, that's a piece.
Then send a picture home?
That is an expensive piece, right? And so when we talked about the hedgehog earlier, you mentioned here, if black had a knight on c6, this is actually a known tactic. This works. And that's why in the hedgehog, like, you don't really want to put your knight on c6. You want to put it on d7 so you can put your queen on the c file. But in this case, unfortunately, I just don't think the tactic works out for white. It's just a full piece. Yeah, you have a nice outpost, but it's a piece, right? And I think that, for black, with some accurate defense here, he should be able to.
Well, now white has e5, right? So, I mean, the other option was to play queen e8 and tolerate that knight on c6.
Mm-hmm.
White can win back a little bit of material here with e5. I don't think it's quite enough for white, but I mean, here knight c6, could he have just said queen e8 and hang out, or does that get just as bad after e5 and then your pieces are lined up on the e file? Yeah, that would be even worse probably. So
yeah,
I think he may have been right to do this. And now, yeah, white can win in exchange with c7 and e5, but that should be a good position for black. So I think Jasur Majidov judged this correctly. He's already got 1 point from the first game, so his judgments have been spot on so far today. All right, back to our GMs. Endgame still progressing. H pawn is thrown once the black king gets too close to the side of the board.
I think Firouzja's strategy here was to try to make this game as short as possible and then start making like really competitive moves once it was like bullet. Basically turn this into 2 different games.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, to deal with the A pawn, white sends the king all the way over there. Once he does, then the F pawn is hard to defend. So,
right. Yeah, and white needs to hold on to this pawn on f4. If you lose this pawn on f4 without getting the pawn on a3, it's just game over.
So here, what Savchenko has in mind is rook takes f4, rook h2, I think, keeping his h pawn as an annoyance. Interesting, rook to a8. So if rook a3, king a3, king h6, king b3, king h5, king c4, king g4.
Well, he's got to make a move. He's got 1 second.
He loses the king and pawn ending. He can't take on a2. He's got 1 second on the board and he can't. So he switches the blockader. All right. But his king is so far away, there's lots of ways to lose to just this f pawn here.
Yeah, I think that Firouzja just figured this out. And that was the one thing that, Savchenko could not afford to do, which was lose this f4 pawn. This pawn just rolls now, and your king is pretty far away.
But I think Firouzja is supposed to just play rook c4 in that position instead of rook g4. Then go to c7 and start moving the f pawn.
Right, like a Lucina. But couldn't he still do that after the king came over? Yeah,
okay, now he went to the d file.
Because it's 2 files apart. That should be more than okay, I believe, for black.
2 files should still be enough here to win this. Yep. All right. Well, that also says that we were right that you want to cut off on the c file, but he remembered a second later, and he actually wins that endgame. That was nice. A mammoth game. That was a mammoth game. What a grind.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that that's actually Firouzja's first win of today, because even though he was able to progress beyond Zavan Andreasyan, that was 2 draws.
With 2 draws.
So that's his first Pro Chess League win against a grandmaster. We had our infographic there, which showed Alireza's only ever match where he had been a national master and his only contest, but that was because he had only played 4 games. So,
right.
The congratulations that we expected to give to Alireza before the end of today. Oh, wow. It's 62.5, David.
That number is growing. That number is insane. They're setting... Do they know they're making history? Does every fan who's still playing know that history is in their hands? They're setting a record that may or may not ever be matched.
I mean, if they hit 70, I don't think that'll be broken this summer series. And we're going to find out. It looks like we're about to take a quick break. But when we come back, can the Moscow Wizards hit 70? And how will, Alireza Firouzja do in his second game here against Boris Savchenko?
Welcome back, everybody, to the Moscow Wizards fan club's grand entry on the World and PCL Summer stage. An emphatic appearance. They've already racked up 64.5 points, just about 20 more than the most ever scored by any other team. If not for that, 20 points for the Capybaras would normally be a competitive score in a live club match.
Yeah, I don't think anyone anticipated the massive turnout from the Moscow Wizards. And you can feel bad all you want for Sao Paulo, but if you're going to join the club and like you're going to be part of Creek Warriors Army, you actually have to show up to the matches, right? And this is supposed to be the big grand opening day for the Sao Paulo Capybaras. They brought in Alireza Firouzja as a free agent. They recruited more fans than any other team has since the start of the summer series. Yeah. And this match is, we're not trying to see if Sao Paulo can win. We're trying to see if Moscow can hit 70 and really shatter the record by a landslide. I mean, it's not even close.
Exciting. So in our featured game here, Firouzja Alireza is playing white here for the Capybaras. A pawn has just been clipped on c2, but if the bishop moves, maybe Firouzja has queen takes c6. Could be a problem for Savchenko. White's got a weak back rank to keep their eyes on, right? So maybe queen c6, queen e7 or something could happen.
Looks like he wants to win the pawn back this way and just go into an opposite. Maybe okay, rook takes d5.
So here black can play queen takes d5 or bishop e6. There's two different tactics that immediately off the cuff should lead to an equal endgame.
Yeah, queen takes d5 is pretty nice. I mean, do you think like this is the kind of move? I mean, the way that Alireza played rook takes d5 so quickly, do you think he expected that? Because I think Boris
he must have seen at least one of those moves. Yeah, probably. I mean, he must have seen both of them. I don't think that either of them has a flaw. So queen d5. Well, the only good move would be to take rook d8. Queen to b3. Does it quite work out? Maybe not. Bishop e6 was played, and that one does work.
Yeah, and Savchenko is already offering a draw.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean if you're Alireza, though, you have to play
playing out an opposite colored bishop endgame once you're a GM, but I guess Alireza has nothing better to do today, so he says, let's play it.
Yeah, I mean, he's proven himself in endgames against Savchenko, so why not give it a shot? I mean, he's probably thinking like some sort of bishop e3, b4, rook c1, and then just try to bring in his king. The problem with that, though, is like if you move the b pawn forward, it makes it really hard for you to contest on the light squares, right? So if you play b4, that bishop, will stay on b5 or d5 forever. And a nice move here by Savchenko, by the way. Rook d8, if rook c4, rook d1 is mate.
Yeah, I was expecting f3 here, but I'm sure he's got f3 and h3 in the offing, both to sort of restrict that light squared bishop. I'll be surprised if he can squeeze something out of this. All right, and even the defender putting the pawns on the dark squares on the king side, he's going to put the pawns on the light squares on the queen side so that the split pawns can be defended by his bishop and can't be attacked by the white bishop. But he's playing f6, g7, h6 on the king side to keep Alireza from being able to come up with a target there on g7 with bishop d4 at any point and the rook coordinating for an attack.
Right, and Firouzja doing the same structurally on the king side as well. Keeping his pawns on dark squares so his bishop can always, and his rook can always protect them, putting his f3, g2, and h3 pawns there so the light squared bishop really can't gain any traction on the king side.
Yeah, and now the bishops would have to get to f1 or f8 for either player to sort of make tactical progress on that side of the board. So maybe this bishop will come to c5 at some point to start looking at the possibility of rook e7, rook e8 and stuff. Nope, something entirely different. I do not know what he's cooking.
That one is a mystery to me. Bishop c1. I mean, bishop c5, rook e3 seemed pretty intuitive there, but maybe he's trying to trap this rook. But I mean, I don't even see how that works, right? Maybe they're just going to agree to a draw here.
Yeah, there's nothing to trap anything. I'm pretty confident that there's nothing.
Another draw offer, by the way.
Stuff here that we don't see. Draw for this time from Alireza. So I think they're in agreement that it's a draw. Just, Savchenko didn't notice it fast enough. probably.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. And the game accidentally keeps going.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the intention from either player. I mean, sometimes with these GMs, you'll see them offer draws, but they're just like, no, I want you to concede the 3 move, right? Because it's a sign of, like maybe psychological dominance or something. But no, I mean, I think in this case, maybe they meant for it to be a draw, and they're just like, okay, I guess we'll play on for a couple more moves. Savchenko actually just declined 2 draw offers, not just 1, which is actually interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he declined just by moving, presumably, so. Savchenko's moves almost look like he's trying to do something, and Firouzja is leaving the A pawn undefended. That's interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure why, because I mean, the idea of b5 doesn't really work because the pawn on c6 and the pawn on a6 are both protected, unless he wants to play b6 and try to play for a win that way.
b5, rook c3, bishop b4. I suppose that's playable. Yeah. Okay, he's done something. He just played king h2. So Firouzja just gave the a pawn. I guess he was afraid of g5, g4 in the position after black played g5, g4 coming to attack f3 and g2. But odd to just lose the a pawn. And I guess this may suggest that Savchenko had reason to decline that draw. Maybe he did it on purpose. Maybe he saw the draw offer and he thought my rook is so active that actually I'm the one torturing now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the key now for black is how do you make progress in the dark squares? If you ever push like g4, you're gonna lose control of your ability to play on the king side of the board. But if you can't make progress with your pawns on the king side, you have to be creative. And I think maybe Savchenko's trying to eye some sort of idea in the future of maybe f5, f4 kind of stuff. But it's so speculative.
Here, having the rook away. Firouzja's looking a bit shaky here. The king wants to stay on h3 now. Then there's bishop e6 check possibly, and then king h2 h3. So he's won a pawn on the king side as well now for black. Okay, try something else with rook here first.
Oh, and I guess the point now is that the king is just going to walk to g5, and then he can just go back to bishop e6 ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the Moscow Wizards just hit 70. It is now 70 to 23 in favor of the Moscow Wizards.
This endgame became surprisingly tense and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's not... The problem for black, though, is you just don't have any breaks left. Now that you've played g takes at h4, unless you're able to start playing moves like bishop to e6 check and make progress, like, there's no next step, right? So Firouzja's holding on.
The only thing I have in mind is this pawn to h3 break. If there's something else, I don't know what it is.
Maybe Savchenko's thinking like king e5, king f4 here in the current position. So that way he can reroute his king to g5. He can also play for bishop e6, and he creates some sort of mating net in cases where white plays king takes h4. But it's still not super clear at all.
No, I mean, Firouzja wants to grab that pawn in a6 to simplify things if he gets the chance here. And it's not really like defendable. So Savchenko needs to do something here pretty soon. Rook a6 even has the advantage of attacking the c6 pawn. So then bishop e6 ideas, you better be making a lot of progress because you're going to hand the c6 pawn over also just to get this h3 pawn break. I don't know for sure that he wants to allow that. Okay, so he plays rook c2 first so that h3 would win the pawn on g2 and probably take on g2 with the rook and box the white king on h1 for mating ideas.
Now that move h3 is like after this idea of bishop d5 is still quite strong though, because now you can weave your king on the light squares after h3 to like f5 and then try to make a breakthrough on g2 or on f3. And then you can actually talk about having winning chances, because your second pass pawn, the pawn on h5, that's going to be able to help you weave a mating net or potentially even promote if white's not careful.
Right. Okay, so white wants to defend the f pawn with the rook to be able to just take on h3 with the g pawn. I was wondering about king h2 to come back up and defend, but then there's bishop takes f3 for black. So that would have been like a bad way to try and control this. Very bad way.
Yeah.
Worst bad way. All right, so he brings the rook back to defend along the third rank. Still kind of passive, and ooh, bishop f2. All right. He wants to get some of this stuff off the board.
I'm trying to figure out if it's just enough, because in this case, like, you really can't do anything with like rook c1 or rook b1 check. I mean, the king just goes to h2 and you're back to square one. You really can't play for h3. So I think he's got to go after this b pawn, and that's what he's doing. He's playing rook b2 to try to provoke this with bishop c5. And then he can kind of continue with his plan, because I don't think white wants to play bishop takes h4 and allow rook takes b4, because now black is just better there. You've got this passed c pawn, you've got the bishop, which is a lot more active than white's bishop. So even though it's opposite colored bishops, it's one that you could probably even have a shot at winning.
Yeah.
And of course, as I say that,
totally agree.
Maybe that there's maybe there's something I'm not seeing here. But I mean, to my eyes, I mean, it just seems like that was good news for Savchenko. I mean, more reason to keep playing.
Tells me Firouzja wasn't feeling optimistic, basically, that he gives this past c pawn. It means he was afraid that if he went back to defend it with bishop c5, that black's plan of moving forward on the king side was scary for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, and Jeffus Lemalinas has just come over from playing his own games, streaming his own games. So put him on your radar for fan prize, Isaac.
Absolutely. Party of 54 is quite impressive.
Streamed, 50 people watching him play. That's pretty good for a fan, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he says he's excited about the PCL, so that's also good in your book, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, hopefully his team, I think he was playing for the Sao Paulo Capybaras, will find its form in these next two live club matches. You know, there's still a couple games going on. I don't know if Moscow has enough games to hit 80 at this point. It looks like I can see 2-3 games going on. I don't know if I see a fourth. But yeah, I mean, they've got a big fan club. You know, it's a tough loss, but we've also seen teams come back from tough losses in week one. So I'm thinking St. Louis in the first week after losing to Chengdu. I'm thinking Baden-Baden after just getting destroyed by Barcelona. We have seen comeback stories in this tournament. And, you know, especially even from teams that don't do well in the first 2 weeks. Even we saw Pittsburgh last week when you were doing commentary with Levy Rosman with that just miraculous comeback. I mean, that could not have possibly, like, no one could have possibly imagined that. So even though it's definitely a discouraging loss, this will be the widest margin that we've had so far. I mean, it's not like Sao Paulo doesn't have the fans. I mean, they're a very strong team.
Yeah. Rook to f8. So he was threatening bishop d4. I thought his plan was to go to h8 and h6 and grab that h pawn. Instead, he attacks the bishop, which no longer has a stable point on d5 now that the c pawn has moved. So for a moment, Savchenko is going to be tactically vulnerable here, right? His bishop's going to be an undefended square. The c5 pawn's on an undefended square. If it gets attacked by a rook on c8 or something, it'll have to go to c4. Then maybe bishop d4 will be played, and he'll go after f6 again.
So what if bishop f7 followed by c4 then?
Yeah, bishop f7. Then we'll see either rook h8 or rook c8. I'm not sure which we'll see, but let's say we see, let's just try one, which is say rook c8, c4, and then I'm going to play rook to c6 for Firouzja.
Yeah, this is still definitely pretty complicated. I mean, black needs to find a way to start playing for like f5, f4, but you really can't do that with the way that the bishop cuts off the king's coordination there.
Okay, bishop f5 happened. He checked him and then went to h8. Now, in theory, the bishop could defend the h5 pawn finally. I mean, he's kind of set that up for him.
Right.
But then he'll switch to the c file because he'll have c8 finally. And I'll have c8, c7, c6 to check the king multiple times and harass this f pawn. Yeah, so bishop d4. And it looks like that f pawn is either going to be sacked or moved to f5. Once it moves to f5, the bishop on g6 is kind of like trapped behind his own pawns in a bad way. I actually think that this is clarifying quite all right for Firouzja.
Yeah, and I think he's starting to untangle himself from the web that Savchenko said early. And like now, okay, there's rook c5, but I mean, eventually rook c6 will be coming in.
So he saw that rook c7, king e6, rook c6, there'd be king d5 at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Same applies here. If he goes rook c6, there's king d5.
I mean, okay, g3 is a good waiting move.
Yeah. Keeping that pawn on h5 from moving in and encroaching on him. The light squared bishop can't hit at f3 at the moment. So what now? Move the king towards the c pawn? I'm not sure. I'm still not sure how to defend this.
I'm still struggling to figure out, you know, I mean, both sides have their weaknesses now. King h1, what?
Yeah, he's staying over there, defending the side of the board where he's got his pawns. And counting on the rook and bishop to cover the c pawn. And those are the long range pieces that can also get back to the king side if necessary. So if he brings his king all the way over to the c pawn, then he's kind of abandoning the king side. His king can't get back quickly to help with anything that comes up over there. So, all right, h5 pawn is being offered. Going to come in with light squared bishop.
And I think Firouzja is more than happy to take that. I mean, I think at this point, because now you can attack the f pawn from both directions, right? Like we talked about before, rook c6, king d5, but now rook h6. If you play king d5, just bishop f6, and yeah, okay, it's still complicated, but white is at least, you know, recovering in time.
Yeah, so he had to calculate, you know, bishop e2 and bishop f1 before he went for it, but I think the plan then was to go and counterattack the pawn on f6. So instead, Savchenko uses that tactical opportunity to advance his pawn from c4 through c3. And the pressure continues.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some pressure on white, but I'm just trying to figure out, how does black make progress? You've got the wrong colored bishop, and what's stopping white from just moving the rook up and down? And as long as like your king doesn't get past like the 5th ranks,
maybe g4 here.
Yeah, just g4.
But
king f1.
Also just wait. Maybe doesn't particularly need to play g4. You could always answer.
Yeah. Okay. So f5, but I mean, bishop g5 looks okay to me. I mean, rook c3 looks strong as well, actually, but
yeah,
it just seems like
rook e3 check, right? That would end this game.
Yeah, and that was one of the concerns I had for black when he played c2 so quickly, is once you put the pawn there, if you don't have a concrete way of breaking through, you run the risk of white creating a fortress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so just rook c3 again, and I think we're going to see a draw. Oh.
He's done something else. Rook coming to d1, I guess. Okay.
I mean, there's still not quite enough here. I mean, arguably, you could even argue for g4 at this point, right? With the idea of creating your own pass pawn.
Yeah, if you're just trying to draw, nothing wrong with playing g4. I'm not sure that he is trying to draw. Maybe he's hoping to flag his opponent now since he didn't go for that rook e3 check. I don't particularly believe that Firouzja misses things. So if he didn't go for rook e3, there's a chance that he's hoping to win on time.
Right. Firouzja just offered a draw, by the way, and Savchenko declined.
So he is ready to take a draw.
And another draw decline there from the wizard. And it looks like scoring has started to slow down.
Yeah, I think it's looking to me like almost all the games are done as they play out this long end game.
I think there's Art Vega is still playing. So there's still a chance for Moscow to hit 80 points today. I'm seeing another game between Najin Chess and Sergezu as well. So some games are going long.
Still a little chance.
But definitely we're arriving towards those final games here as Moscow tries to hit 80.
Art Vega has 2 extra pawns against Drinkenmon. So that will not be another point for Moscow, right? Since Artega is representing the Capybaras. All right, I got to get back to our GMs. 13 seconds for Savchenko. It's bold to try to win like that.
I mean, he's got nothing to lose at this point, right? I mean, his team's already done his job. He already scored his point against Zavin. So if he loses this game trying to win it, I mean, if I'm the general manager of Vlad Dobrov, I'm not upset at all, for trying to test out to see how does Alireza Firouzja handle pressure, because this is experience that might prove valuable for Savchenko in the playoffs if Moscow makes it.
And he just won something serious there.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That was sick how he built that ladder with his bishop.
Okay, but there's still work to do here too, because if White just trades off the 2 pawns for the 1 pawn, that's a very well-known difficult endgame to win.
Yeah, Rook F8 was very, very, very accurate to try and trade this pawn, because otherwise if you played G4, Black had pawn to F4. So,
this is smart, because now if Rook F5, King G3, and that White king is stuck there, because King F1, I mean, you've got all sorts of different ideas here, I think, right?
He's going to hide in there and mate him. The G pawn actually loses for White in some positions. Okay, so he goes with G takes F. Ooh la la. The bishop's covering G8 though. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Firouzja saw this. So he has to play King F1 here.
Mm-hmm.
And then King takes F3.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know your rook and bishop versus rook? Because it's not a pattern that you can memorize. You just kind of have to have a feel for it.
I do not. I mean, I've seen some of the basics.
I mean, I feel like, as a much weaker player here, between the two of us, like all I know about this is 7th rank defense. And that solves all the problems for the side with just the rook. But it's a lot harder than that, especially in practice.
All right, bishop F3 is threatened. Cover that. One thing is he always has a waiting move with his F pawn, so that's something. But now if the king moves, the rook can go to like H5, right? If the king goes to E1. So maybe you want to go to C1 and stay away from him, but then it's rook to B5.
Wait, isn't this the exact kind of position you want to avoid in these rook and bishop versus rook end games?
Well, this position is over. I mean, it's just mate.
Yeah, I mean, King C1 that was kind of forced there, right? I mean, it was still game to be played.
Did that make a difference? Rook D5, King C1, Rook B5. How would you get out of that?
Yeah. So he just walked into the net then by playing this.
So he had him.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, with the F pawn, it might even be lost, right? Because it's just like another place where you don't have checks.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point.
Yeah. The Reykjavik Puffins are saying it was just winning. So,
that's why you study your end games, right? So
I believe, as you said, to trade off the pawns, he actually really would have liked to get rid of his pawns. The other funny variation was like after King F4, if you go Rook F5, King G3, King F1, Bishop takes F3, and here normally you would need to play like Rook G5 check, and you can't because of the G.
Yeah.
Right, so then you play like King E1. Oh, but actually the bishop could help you in one situation, because here on Rook E2, the king can go to D1, and you can't go pick up the rook. Yeah, so that's funny. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. And there's still one game going, and it looked like Black was going to win and make it 80 points for Moscow, but unfortunately, because he didn't know the shouldering technique, it's going to be 79.5 to 28.5.
79.5. So that's the mark, 80.
Yeah, so 80 is the magic number.
Or first here as the Puffins, perhaps their manager. They're saying King takes G4, hitting the rook, and then wherever it goes, try and get a discovery. Nice move, right? King G4 at the end. Wow. And congrats to the Moscow Wizards fans. 1 million of you showed up. 1 million points were scored. Bravo. Super strong. Isaac, do we have a third interview today?
No, I do not believe we do.
Okay.
But we can take a look at the standings to see how this match affected what we thought would be happening.
Show us what happened. My 6-point week was not scored by the Capybaras, but by the Wizards.
No, the Movers. And even more craziness, right? The Mumbai Movers got the 6-point perfect week.
Oh, sorry. It was Amanatov who won.
Yeah, so
the Amanatov who won the whole thing. Yeah, I was just overwhelmed by like what the Wizards just did. Okay, so tell me the standings, Isaac, because this is a lot.
So we've got 6 points for the Mumbai Movers, and if we know anything about how the previous groups, have worked out, if you score at least 10 points, you're in pretty good consideration for the, for the playoffs. So Mumbai has some leeway now. The Moscow Wizards are currently stuck at 4 points. They had a really good showing today. They got 1 point in the knockout. I think they wish that they had gotten more, but they're in a really safe position right now. Sao Paulo and Armenia, though, I mean, we kind of thought Armenia would be towards the bottom, but Sao Paulo is the biggest surprise of the day, only scoring 2 points through that knockout battle. Alireza Firouzja losing to Amanatov there. But I think we got a pretty good idea in terms of which players we're working with. We got to see a little bit of everybody in the fighting spirit of all 4 players. Who are you most impressed by from an individual performance today?
Amanatov. Hey, he won the knockout, right? But I mean, his games was black. I mean, he won the knockout playing black, right? He was up against the the draw odds, the white advantage, all of that, right? And that's a huge disadvantage. And he was just like crushing. I mean, he played fantastically those games. So yeah, that's why I'd like to see come play again next week.
Yeah, and I know that Amanatov has had really good tournament results recently in Mumbai. So this continues to, be the good luck trend for him. So he's got to find more events Mumbai related to, continue making a lot of progress. And so that means that, the fans will have to wait till next week for more live club match action. The matches will start at 7 a.m. Pacific again next week. And, it's going to be a pretty interesting, group of matches that we'll have in next week. Next week, Moscow will play Mumbai. Those are probably 2 teams that we would consider to be pretty level at this point. And Armenia versus Sao Paulo, that's going to be a must-win game for both teams. I mean, they can't take 0 points in the Armenia Sao Paulo match. You have to get 3 to have any shot of being able to progress to that Summer Series championship.
Yeah. True. All right. So same time next week, same time the week after, 7 a.m. Pacific for the next 2 weeks of Division C. Before we get into Division D and our 9 a.m. Pacific start time in August.
For sure. And before we sign off for today, we do have the Pro Chess League Summer Series post show with National Master James Canty, who will be rating as soon as this broadcast is over. He'll be reviewing all of your games. And I know that there's a lot of them because we just saw the number of fans playing for Moscow.
Make him work long and hard, guys. Bring him all your games, 100 games to analyze. He'll be here for the whole day and not know why it happened.
Yeah, I mean, he'll be crushed for sure. But he's a great guy to learn from. And even if he doesn't get to go over your game, the little tidbits that he gives in these games are like little nuggets of like really valuable information. So definitely make sure to stop by. He's an entertaining guy to do analysis with, very strong player, and post-show host for the Pro Chess League. So I guess that's going to do it for us, David. I mean, what were your final thoughts here for the performances today?
Have a nice day, everybody. It was awesome. Amanatov, that's my guy. Amanatov and the Wizards, that fan club.
Yeah, I think the theme for today is, Sao Paulo, welcome to the Pro Chess League. But for the Moscow Wizards, welcome to the Summer Series. I mean, very surprising, which fan club wound up turning out. But we've got a lot of, exciting things to look over and consider for our projections for next week. And we'll be back with more action at 7 a.m. Pacific time on Saturday.